So, this happened to me when I was 6 or 7, living in Massachusetts. Back then, my family and I lived in a basement under this family and their 2 kids. Like I said, I was around 6 or 7 at this time, and this family had a daughter that was probably 4 or 5, and another that was maybe 10. Now, the 5-year-old was a strange little girl from the very moment you met her. Her name was Amy. Amy was quiet and wide-eyed, and would just kind of stare through you every time you talked to her even, and she would just not like to have company from anyone, not even her mother. And one day, my mum came to me asking me to play more with Amy because she was so alone and had no friends and all that. Since I didn't know anything at the time, I was just like, whatever, and I went upstairs to play with her. Once I got there, I was just kind of hanging out with her in the living room, watching cartoons while she just sat there. Her sister then comes into the room and asks me if I really came to play with Amy. I said that yes, I did, but she really didn't give me attention, so I was just going to kind of watch TV. Her sister then turns to me and says something like, "Good, don't interact with her too much, she's not right." I didn't really think too much of it at that time, and the day kind of ended with nothing more happening. In fact, it was pretty boring, really. A couple of days later, I go out to play with Amy again. My mum told me to. And after a few minutes there, Amy turns to me and says, "You need to leave. She doesn't like it when I play with you," while constantly shifting her eyes from me to the windows. I don't remember exactly what happened because it was years ago, but I remember feeling super queasy at the time and very uncomfortable, so I just sort of went back home and told my mum what happened. Now, my mum was a very Christian woman, and so was Amy's mum. When I told her this, she immediately got very worried and told me not to go back there. Apparently, Amy's mum had already told my mum that Amy always mentioned a friend that would tell her what to do and what to say, like an imaginary friend. I didn't really have much more contact with Amy alone after this, but I did learn what comes next as an adult, talking to my mum about it. After Amy said that I couldn't play with her anymore, my mum and her mum went to talk to Amy to understand what was wrong and why she didn't want to play with me. That's when Amy first described her friend in detail. Apparently, she said that her friend would yell at her and make her do bad things if she didn't obey her. She described her friend as a young girl, just a bit older than her, with dirt on her face and under her nails, and wearing a dirty old white dress. Her friend also had very bad teeth, according to Amy. As she was telling me this, my mum says that Amy started crying and screaming while staring at the window. "Get out of here. I'm not going to follow you. Mum, make her stop. She wants me to follow her out of the window. Please get her out of here. I don't like her. She's getting angry." Our mothers immediately took her out of the house and we all went to stay at the church. Amy said the girl would come crawling on the ceiling apparently, and up the walls at night to her room, and tell her to do bad things like swear at her sister, beat her parents, not brush her teeth. She didn't and had cavities all over her teeth, and even things like grab a knife or jump out her window. A few days later, they all went into Amy's room. My mum, her mum, Amy, and a pastor from our church to try and to do, I don't know, exercise whatever was there or whatever. My mum says at first Amy was crying while this happened and begging them to stop. But then she started laughing and saying that they were weak and sinners and things like that. Eventually, apparently Amy just kind of passed out sleeping. I'm really not sure what happened next because we moved out of the house, and after that I never saw Amy again. What I do know, though, is that my mum says the pastors went to her house several more times, and Amy also went to a psychologist and a psychiatrist as well. I didn't see most of this happening other than her telling me not to play with her and the super weird vibes from being near her. I remember very vividly that whenever she got into the room, you could sort of feel the mood change and get heavier, even to a 7-year-old. Anyways, that's my story. I have no pictures or anything like that, but I still get goosebumps just thinking about Amy. She was a very, very creepy little girl. Sorry if you want more than this, but I really don't know all the details because I was so young back then, and most of what I know today is just from asking my parents, so yeah. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I also hope that Amy's doing okay. So, my mum and I were visiting my family and staying in a cabin at my uncle's ranch. There's a main house, a bunch of animal pens or fields, a dog kennel, and then there's the guest cabin across the lot from the main house. There are other homes nearby, so it wasn't super remote or anything, but we were surrounded by forest, mountains, and obviously some fields. So, middle of the night, my mum and I are sleeping and we both wake up because there's suddenly a really strong, weird smell permeating the cabin. We commented that it must be a skunk, but also, both of our dogs sat up and got restless. They didn't bark or make any noise. I was having trouble getting back to sleep with the smell, and getting the dogs to lay down again was difficult as well. So I just went outside to have a cigarette in the end. It was pretty much pitch black at this point, but I could see my immediate area from a dim porch light. I was leaning against my car and I started to hear someone walking across the gravel. From the sound, I presume that the footsteps originated from the forest area behind the barn, then walked through the gravel parking area and turned toward the cabin. I thought that it was weird that whoever it was seemed to have passed by the kennel, and the dogs weren't making any noise. None of the animals were, in fact. But I figured that it had to have been my uncle or one of my cousins out doing something. I was curious what they were doing out so late at night. I was tracking where the footsteps were from the sound as they were getting closer, and just waiting for someone to walk near enough that I would see who they were. I almost called out too, but in the end I decided to wait. Eventually, though, I saw what appeared to be someone wearing a hairy brown coat walking toward the field next to me. Now this is where it gets weird. You see, it was getting closer and about to walk by me, parallel by about maybe 6 to 10 feet. It was close enough that I realized that what I thought was a person in a hairy brown coat was actually the bottom half of a large creature on 2 legs. The bottom half, 2 legs and hindquarters, was about the size of an average adult, and also appeared brown. The top half that I could only make out in the silhouette appeared black. Honestly, I couldn't tell how tall it was in the dark, but it just walked by and then into the field that was next to the cabin. Also, the gate wasn't open. I checked the next morning, so it would have had to have stepped over it to get into the field. I kind of registered what I saw, thought that I should probably be freaking out, but in the end I just sort of went back inside and I went back to bed. I did a little walk through the property the next day, to make sure all the animals were there and unharmed. And in the end, I only told my mum about the experience. We ended up coming back the next month, and she told my aunt and uncle about it then. I fully expected them to make fun of me for talking about Bigfoot, but my aunt, she just asked for some clarification and said that her sister had told them about seeing something similar, which honestly only made things 10 times freakier. This happened around 2021, and sometimes I still find it hard to grasp. For context, I now live in a different place, and along with most of my relatives, so I feel safer saying this here, I guess. The reason I'm sharing this is for people to learn and possibly caution themselves from my experience. Now, I'd say the place that I lived in was just pretty old. It wasn't densely populated, nor empty either. It had wooded areas around it that you could cycle to the mall through, school as well, and other normal places, but you'd have to take a car to go to places like the hospital. I was basically in my last year of high school at this point, and Being an only child and a girl on top of that made my parents overprotective, and I was naturally more cautious than the rest of my friend group. I didn't really mind being that way, though, because I always thought that was the better option anyway. So, teenagers from school would have these sort of outdoor get-togethers in the woods, a few kilometers away from my school. It was just common for people to lounge out and about, chilling till like 3 in the morning or whatever. And including me, it was a group of 4. They decided, since it was our last year, that we should probably drink together in the woods. Obviously, looking back, that was a really stupid idea. It wasn't unsafe, I guess, and it wasn't deep in the woods either, but still. There's a pretty clear trail, though, and a small sort of openish area where people would, get their dogs and whatnot. We planned to do it on a Thursday because my parents would be out and the rest would convince theirs that we were having a sleepover. Now, we bought the alcohol and some other stuff just to chill out. There were no others that day because it was a weekday and quite chilly as well. It was pretty lively. You could see houses from the distance and people would be driving around and all, so naturally we felt pretty safe. We walked on the trail for about a minute when, for whatever reason, I just felt really uneasy. I felt like we were being watched or something like that, and looked over to one of my friends. She looked a little bit distressed too, but I guess we just sort of shrugged it off in the end. We walked a few more minutes and we found our spot. We started drinking and basically spent like an hour and a half of gossiping and having those sort of deep talks while you get drunk. I didn't drink too much and neither did my other friend. We were just a little bit tipsy. Now, we forgot about the brief weird feeling that we had felt while walking, until we heard something from thick in the trees in front of us. Even though we were loud, we all heard it too. It was this sort of weird sort of snickering or giggling. I got up from this tree log that I was sitting on and just dragged my friends back a little bit. We had a fire going and 2 torches, but still couldn't really see into that area. It wasn't that close to us. I think about maybe 4 doors away if you place them horizontally. So the fact that we heard that laugh was just sort of insane to me. I pointed the flashlight into the area and nobody came out. I sat back down and when I turned the flashlight off, there was a silhouette coming out. I switched on the flash to blind that person while my other friends did the same. We started yelling and getting ready to run when I saw what I can only describe as the most horrifying thing that I have ever seen. It was this man who we'd never seen before. He had this sort of plaster-like smile and his hair was covered in dirt. He was completely pale and his eyes were almost like he wasn't looking at us but just in our sort of general direction. It's difficult to explain just how creepy this was, but it was textbook creepy. We all ran for it. My very drunk friends even managed to snap out of it. We got to my house eventually. I lived the closest to the place, and said that we would call the cops. We absolutely terrified our parents as well, but yeah, we called the cops and in the end they found nothing. Word eventually got out and people pretty much stayed away from the paths at nighttime, and a couple of the guys in our school managed to get their dads and all with guns to find the guy, but nothing ever really came of it. Anyway, fast forward to maybe about a month later, but we didn't talk about it much and we never did anything like that again either. I got a pocket knife and some pepper spray to keep on me at that point as well. I went home after school and I was exhausted this day, so I decided to take a nap in the end. My dad was at work and my mum was visiting her sister. But I suddenly woke up to this weird sound. We had a 1-story and the walls were not too thick, so you could hear things all the time. Even still though, I had a bad feeling, so I locked all the doors and even the windows out of habit. Still, fearing for the worst, I also locked my room door and kind of looked out my window. There was nothing at this point. I grabbed a bat and my phone, heading out of my room. I looked at all the doors and everything was locked. But there was this weird, shuffling outside of my house, and I looked through the windows of my living room, and I kid you not, It was the same dude from the woods. He was just outside, walking in this erratic, eerie way, which honestly just sent me into a complete spiral. He somehow saw me and started saying hi there very loudly. I called the police, and after that I told him to get lost. After he started saying my name and all my friends' names as well. The police, they eventually got here, and they actually got him this time. They questioned him, and he had no history of mental illness or anything. He had no clinical disorder, and after enough questioning, he finally confessed to liking young women. He is apparently in jail now for other related reasons, but he'll probably get out in a couple of years, and to be honest, I'm kind of worried about that. Especially because he was guilty of attempted sexual assault and harassment. And the worst part is, that's all I know about. So this happened just last night, and I'm really not sure if it's paranormal, but whatever the case may be, it's still pretty creepy. Perhaps even more so if it isn't paranormal. So my room is up against the front side of my house on the second story, and there's a window facing the front yard right next to my bed. I'm sitting there reading a book with my lamp on when I start hearing my name outside. At first it was so quiet that I didn't really hear it or pay attention to it. But then it got louder and louder, and I was really confused because it sounded like my old neighbor, who just moved out, but visited that same day, because it sounded like an 11-year-old boy's voice, although it sounded off from my old neighbor. I was confused though because he had visited my house that day and had already left to go back to his house in another town. Plus, it was really late at night for him to be trying to get me to go outside. I could tell from the tone of the voice though that whoever it was trying hard to get someone's attention. But right when I paid attention to the voice and thought all of this, the voice just suddenly stopped, and I realized that my shadow was being projected onto the window because of the lamp. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone there. But I did hear as if someone was opening and closing the downstairs window on that side. I went downstairs and checked with my sisters who were watching TV. I asked them if the TV was loud or if they heard someone calling my name, to which both of them said no, and the TV was actually really quiet. And then I went into my parents' room to ask them about it. Both of them had been asleep and they heard nothing. So in the end, I just went back to sleep at that point and nothing else happened. The thing is that this isn't the first time that I've heard voices at that window. You see, years ago when my house was severely haunted, I was opening the blinds in the morning and I heard a woman whisper right into my ear, "Good night." I could even feel the breath on my ear, which was especially freaky. I smiled because I thought it was my mum at first messing with me and saying good night when it was morning. I turned around with a smile, and my smile immediately disappeared from my face because there was nobody else in the room. Everyone else was either across the hall or downstairs completely. Plus, I didn't hear anyone come or leave, and so that was definitely spooky. Anyway, if you have any ideas as to what this voice might have been, then please do let me know, because I'm hoping that it isn't a repeat of, well, whatever those voices were. So I grew up on a farm in Max Creek, Missouri, literally in the middle of nowhere. My mum and my dad, they always told me about this old farm called the Arnholtz Farm, and that it was supposedly haunted. My mum used to be friends with a lady who lived there in high school, and when visiting once, saw a man standing at the top of the stairs, so they called the police. They come to find out later that it was the man who apparently ended himself there in the house. A bit of backstory before I begin as well. One man, he shot himself in the house, and another hung himself in the barn, and it had a really nice family cemetery just down the hill. That's just how it was back in the days. Cemeteries were often on private land. My dad told me his younger brother David had taken a date for a drive and saw what looked like candlelight in the windows. There had not been anyone living on the farm for years at this point. So one day, I decided to go and check it out for myself. My grandfather owned the land after all, so it wasn't like I was going to get into trouble or anything. This was also in late August. So there was a good walk up a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, maybe about 30 minutes. I got to the middle gate and I climbed over, and this is where things started to get interesting. You see, as soon as I got over the fence, I felt like something was watching me. I shrugged it off and started down the small path, which was just big enough for a pickup to drive down. As I started to walk, I noticed something was walking in the woods on my right, keeping stride with me step for step. I figured maybe a deer or wild turkeys, so I kept going down the road, but the steps kept the same pace as me and were literally parallel to me in the woods. I started to get creeped out, so I did a bit of a test to see what would happen. I would change the pace of my walk from fast to slow, and whatever it was doing the same. So to really test it, I just took off at a dead sprint, and so did it. And then I stopped, and it did too. I challenged whatever it was to stop messing around and to come out and face me, but nothing. By this time, I had gotten to the clearing where the house was along with the barn. The path had a sort of mid-turn to the right in a clearing with the house on the right and the barn to the left. Once I made it to the clearing, whatever was following me didn't follow me out of the woods. The house was really starting to fall apart as well. Whoever lived there had a thing for roosters because there were paper clippings all over a wall. I couldn't go upstairs because the floors were sagging. I went and checked out the barn at one point. The rope that the man had used, it was still there, and you could see that it was frayed from where they had cut him down. I went just down the hill to the left of the barn and paid my respects to the family buried in the small cemetery plot. I spent maybe 2 hours just checking the place out. It was starting to get late, so I figured that I had better get heading home anyway. And just as soon as I got around the bend into the woods, whatever was in there, it started up with walking stride for stride with me again, but on the opposite side of the trail. This went all the way to the gate. It literally followed me right up to the gate. I climbed over the gate, and as I was walking away, I heard it walk up to the gate and stop. I turned around, and there was nothing. I was only 4 or 5 steps away, so I should have been able to see something, but there was nothing there. I ended up nervously saying, "Have a good day" to whatever it was, and in the end I just left. I never did go back to that place, but I guess now I sort of would like to just see it again. So one night, me and my friends were playing some hide-and-seek in our hometown. We were probably about 13 at the time. I went into a small area that is basically sort of like a shortcut from the main road to the side road. I unfortunately went alone, and I didn't even think of what could happen. I remember that we were only 13 at that time, and we didn't bring phones with us, so if something actually happened to us, nobody would have even known. The game started, and I ran sprinting into the woods area. The first 30 seconds were pretty good. Disclaimer too, we have a rule that we have to come to the checkpoint where we start, and we have to save ourselves from not getting picked to search or whatever. But after around maybe a minute, I start hearing footsteps. I say, "Hello, are you one of my friends?" And something that was there didn't say anything. So I started backing out. Fortunately, the woods area has a main route and 2 side ones, so I could have run either way. I start backing out, and from nowhere, this man just appears from the woods and starts sprinting at me while saying, "I'm going to catch you," in a creepy and sort of eerie way, like a kidnapper, I imagine. Fortunately, at that time, I had trained football or soccer, so I was pretty confident that I could outrun him or at least make him tired. I pretty much sprint all the way through the woods with the only light being the moonlight, and after around 2 minutes, he eventually gave up. I continued sprinting and I got myself all the way to the checkpoint and told all of my friends what had just happened. Of course, no one believed me, but I didn't care since I knew it was real. We ended up ending our game early that night, just out of caution. And to this day, I still don't know who or what had tried to catch me that night. But for sure, I know that if I hadn't have trained like I had as a young guy, the outcome would have possibly been very, very different. I have always experienced paranormal things, and my earliest memory of anything paranormal was age 4. I have many stories of things that I've witnessed in my lifetime, but this is one from my time living in rural Missouri. In 2009, I moved in with my boyfriend, now husband, and his family. They lived in a beautiful farmhouse on several acres of land. The nearest neighbor was probably a half a mile down the road, so it was very quiet. This home has a large basement that was basically a 2-bedroom apartment, and that's where my husband and I lived. As soon as I moved in, though, I started to notice strange sounds and see things. I didn't mention these things to him because, well, I didn't want him to think that I was crazy. It would take me a long time to share every single instance of what we witnessed, but I'll tell you the ones that still scare me to today when I think back. Now, right outside of our bedroom door was a long hallway that led to the staircase and another bedroom. We were the only 2 people to ever go into the basement, and one night we were already in bed watching TV. We began to hear extremely heavy footsteps pacing up and down the hallway. It was so heavy that we thought maybe someone had broken into the house and was wearing heavy work boots or something. We turned the television off and started to listen closely. It would pass by our door and seem to go towards the end of the hall, and then would sort of double back near the door. At this point, our dog was growling and looking towards the door. With the TV off, the bedroom was pitch black dark as well. My husband called out hello, and the sound of the boots, they stopped. He started to text his mother, the only other person home that night. He asked her if she was downstairs, and she responded shortly after that she was sleeping. My husband started to get up and find out what was in the house. He made it about halfway to the door, and all of a sudden the door literally flew open. It was with such a force that the doorknob knocked a small hole in the wall. At that point, our dog went absolutely crazy and was barking and ran to hide under a table. The bedroom was extremely dark, so my husband tried to hurry and turn the lights on. Lights come on and silence. He runs into the hallway to look around. We both searched the entire basement, but we found nothing. Another night, we were sitting in the living room area in the basement watching television. Behind the living room area was a kitchen area that had a bit of a long bar there. We had a few bar stools up on the bar and a telephone on a charger. This particular night, we were the only ones at home as everyone else had gone out to dinner. We start to hear a weird sound, almost like someone was moving furniture across the floor. We sort of lower the volume on the TV so that we can hear things better. We hear something moving again. All of a sudden, though, we hear a very loud crashing sound right behind the couch. We then feel something hit the back of the couch. We both jumped up terrified and looked behind us. 2 of the bar stools that were on the bar are now on the floor behind the couch. Keep in mind the kitchen area sat back about 14 or 15 feet from where the couch was, and if they simply fell somehow, there was just no possible way they could have traveled like that. The phone that was on the other end of the bar was about 10 feet away on the floor and ripped from the charger. We looked around, looked at each other, and we literally ran up the stairs and outside until we calmed down a bit. I was absolutely terrified and feared the basement after that moment. We then started to see what looked like, I want to say, a possible shadow figure standing in the doorway. Each time we would see it, it was just standing there and would slowly move away. It got to the point that we would try to ignore it until it went away. We told his mum and stepdad, and they told us that they saw and heard things frequently too. We would be upstairs and hear the toilet flush in the bathroom. We would then hear the water in the sink turn on and then silence. At night, if we came upstairs and walked through the house while the lights were off, you would always feel as though you were being watched. Then, we made the mistake of trying to hold a seance one evening. We wanted to ask and see what was there, or maybe what they wanted. We were sitting in the kitchen upstairs in the main part of the house. There's a sort of arched doorway to the exit kitchen, and just to the right as you walk through the arched doorway were the stairs leading back down into the basement. Now, as we're asking if anyone would like to talk to us, we hear what sounds like someone running up the stairs from the basement. They were very heavy footsteps and unmistakable. His mum and little sister were with us at the table that day, and all four of us jumped up, scared like we'd never been. We all looked at the doorway to see who was coming up those stairs, and as soon as it seemed like it was nearing the top of the stairs, it went absolutely dead silent. We all had to go outside until we calmed down a bit and had the courage again to go back in. These are just a few examples out of many more things that we witnessed while we were living there. I asked my husband if he had ever noticed any of these things happening before now, and he said that things happened, but nowhere near as bad as once I moved in. His mother told me the same thing too. We ended up going to the library and speaking with a local historian, and she told us that in the late 70s, a young woman had actually ended her life there in that home. And, yep, you guessed it, in the basement. She told us that a young woman who lived in the home had become very depressed. She apparently hung herself in an area right by the basement kitchen, which immediately things started to make a whole lot more sense at that point. I have so many more experiences in that house. If anyone would like to hear them at some point, then leave a comment below and maybe I'll write some more up for all of you guys to hear. But for now, this will have to do, and if you got this far, then thanks for listening. I'm quite a bit older now, but there's this memory that I have from when I was around 7 or 8 that I've never been able to stop thinking about. So, I was laying in bed asleep and swaddled in so many blankets that it was actually difficult to move. I awoke to an odd feeling that I was being watched. I peeked up and saw a figure staring at me. I couldn't make out its face, but it had the same silhouette and height my brother did. It was also wearing a striped shirt and jeans that I was sure were my brother's. I was staring at it where its face should have been, and he wasn't speaking. After a few moments of silence, I asked, "Bubba, what are you doing?" He didn't say a word. "Close my door." Again, nothing. I closed and rubbed my eyes, and when I looked up, he was gone, and my door was left open. I was sure that he did it to mess with me, and I was frustrated, so I got up to confront him. I wriggled out of my nest of blankets, and I went out into the living room where my parents were. But my brother was nowhere in the room, so I asked where he was. And my mum told me that he had gone out with some friends some time ago. I was confused and told them that he was just staring at me in my doorway. My mum told me that no, he wasn't, and he had been gone for hours. I pressed on and said that I just saw him and he was staring at me, not saying anything. She asked what he was wearing, and I told her that he had a striped shirt on. She told me that that wasn't what he was wearing when he left. I don't even think he owned a striped shirt actually in the end, but we all kind of shrugged it off like, that was weird. But it was hard for me to fall back asleep after that. I was very creeped out. My parents were very creeped out by that as well, and it was all just very confusing. I never did get an answer to who or what was staring at me, and I've wondered multiple times if I just, hallucinated or something. Either way, it was a creepy experience, and like I said, it's something that I think back on all the time. This happened a little over 10 years ago, but the memory is still very vivid. My parents, they had just rented a new house, and my sister and I were splitting the basement. I had my full-size mirror placed against the back wall at the time, so by looking in it, you could see the open doorway that led to the stairs. They were just around the corner of the doorway, so you couldn't actually see the stairs, though. But anyway, my sister also had a big wardrobe that she kept a TV on and clothes in, which wasn't lying flat against the other wall. It sort of came out on an angle which is back towards the stairs, basically. Now, I was doing my makeup one day not too long after moving in, and I looked down to grab something, and when I looked back up, there was a little boy crouched down in the corner behind my sister's wardrobe. I never got to see his face, but he was wearing a yellow shirt with red shorts and black shoes. As soon as I caught sight of him, even though he didn't see me see him, he got up and shot straight out the doorway, and I assume up the stairs. Of course, I got up as quick as I could and tried to chase after him, but he was gone. Also, there was no sound from him at all, no footsteps that should have been there by the way that he was sprinting, and really, there was nowhere that he could have hidden. The underneath of the stairs was open since we had just moved in. I could see every inch of it, so really there was nowhere to go. I don't know who that boy was. I tried to research the house to see if there were any stories about it, or a little boy in the area or whatever, but I couldn't find anything. All I know is that after I looked for him, I felt nothing but sadness following him. The whole area that I grew up in was known for shootings and illegal activities and such, so who knows, maybe he was a victim of something like that. I don't know, but it's just an experience that has always stuck with me ever since then, and I don't think that I'll ever forget it. This is sort of a collection of childhood encounters I and even some of my family members have had in this one haunted house over some years. One of them in particular I've told before, but I hope you guys enjoy it. So this was around 2008 to 2009-ish. I lived in a haunted house at an early age, though despite this, my memory remains fresh of most of these encounters. We were there for a year, so I was 4, turning 5 at the time. I lived with my older brother, older than me by 3 years, a younger sister, younger by 3 years, so still just a baby at the time, mother and father. The house always looked overgrown. Thin vines grew on the walls, large bushes in the front of the windows, and it was fenced in front with a large gate circling the backyard. And the hauntings, well, they started pretty quickly. My mother would hear heavy foot stomps up the stairs, despite nobody being there. She'd also hear my grandmother singing to my sister, despite my grandmother dying just months earlier. Whilst on the topic of my grandmother, my mother, she saw a massive pile of ladybugs covering the car just days after my grandmother passed. My grandmother, despite being tough, always liked ladybugs. Anyway, there was also this time that she was in the backyard. It was during the afternoon and the weather was perfect for the summer. She was closing the large gate, and mind you, she's a big and very strong lady, and yet this gate had her in one heck of a struggle. She finally closed it and locked it as she went to go inside, until she heard a sharp splintering sort of snap. She turned around to see the gate, wide open, lock busted, as if a bull had just rammed into it. My father would also get locked out of the house a lot, despite nobody being inside. And my brother, well, he would see the doors opening by themselves, and he even told me just recently about how he'd always see a girl on the other side of the gate watching him play, every day. But my experience was one of the worst. You see, I, being a mother's boy, was looking out of my window watching my mother go to work. She had a double shift, as my dad wasn't the best of dads, to put it lightly. I stared until I noticed a large pitch-black snake following her to her car. The snake looked to be double her in length, despite its slithering, thus curling its body. My mother is 5'9", which makes the snake around 11 feet long, I would guess. It had followed her for a couple of minutes, until she had gotten into her car. Then it slithered back into the bushes near my window. I looked down to see it looking right at me, and despite this, I still would go outside and play like always, being a kid, I guess. Playing in the backyard till dusk, my brother and I were doing our own things on opposite sides. My brother loved sports, so he ran around throwing a football, whereas I played with one of my toy animals. The one toy in specific was a big T-Rex. The T-Rex looked like one of the older renditions before Jurassic Park, upright, with its tail dragging on the ground. As the sun set further, our mother called us inside for dinner, so we went inside, and I noticed that I left my toy, and so I went to go and get it. It was dark to where I couldn't really make out any noticeable colors, but not so dark that I couldn't see outlines and details of objects yet. And I noticed the T-Rex chilling right by the tree where I had left it. I went to pick it up, only for it to crumble as if it was dirt, in the shape of a T-Rex. I got freaked out by that, and I just ran back inside. Now, notice that I said that I can remember most of these encounters. But the reason I point this out is because my father said that he'd often see me sitting in the corner of my room or in front of a blank screen. He'd ask me what I was doing, and I would always simply say that the old man told me to. I have no recollection of this happening, but my father swears up and down that this happened. He would also have these sleep paralysis episodes, I think, often seeing shadow folk around the room, whispering to each other. And this last one was definitely the most horrific. Waking up in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps. Luckily my TV was on, so I still had light. Thinking though that it was my dad, I got up to go and see him. But when I opened the bedroom door, there was this old man standing there. He looked down at me, and that's when I noticed that he looked corpse-like. I absolutely freaked and banged on my mother's bedroom door. She opened it, and I hollered about how there was this ugly man in the house. She took it as someone actually breaking in and picked me up with one hand and had a bat in the other and basically ran around the house, turning every light on and cussing loud enough to worry some of the neighbors. Just recently, when I was talking to my mum about the house, she said that the old man incident had actually happened twice, and that my great-grandpa might have actually known the guy. I may ask him about it sometime, but this was just one of my many paranormal experiences in that house. This happened to me and my still current boyfriend about 2 years ago. We live in a city that has a main downtown area. The main city is pretty liberal, I guess, but once you get out into the country, it can become quite the opposite. That being said, the main city, and especially the downtown area, has a pretty bad homeless problem that's only gotten worse over the years too. For the most part, the homeless population is pretty harmless. They know the good spots to hang out, a lot of the times they just smile at you, and I always smile back, and you just go on your way. Sadly, there has been an increase of incidents, infer what you will, in the last few years with the rise of overdoses and more addictive street drugs. So, I was living in the main downtown area at this time, having just recently graduated college and wanting to be close to the nightlife. My best friend that I met in college and I were roommates, and we had an apartment right in the middle of downtown. It was pretty much the perfect setup. My boyfriend, his name was Jack, happened to live 1 block down and then about 5 or 6 blocks south of that. It was about a 10-minute walk, give or take. It was even closer to the heart of downtown as well. So you can probably imagine how convenient that made it for hanging out, and also not having to take a car and worry about parking and all that. Now, one overcast Sunday morning, my boyfriend and I woke up at my place and decided to walk over to his so he could grab some things. We had walked the majority of the way. It really was just a straight walk on sidewalks the whole time. We were on the right side of the road with the street to our left. We're not even 1 minute away from my boyfriend's place when I notice something ahead that makes me feel a bit uneasy. First off, there's a guy walking in front of us in the same direction that we are, with his back to us. I can see that he has both earbuds in. He's walking at about the same pace, so we aren't about to run into him or anything. In front of him, facing and walking towards all of us, is a different guy though. He had a small frame, was maybe 5'8", wearing dark pants, a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and a backpack. Even though his hood was up, I could still see his face. Some short black hair poked out, pale skin, and these black, beady, crazy eyes that I'll never forget. I assumed him to be homeless, as it was an area that was popular for them. Now, he wasn't looking at us, but rather the pedestrian with the earbuds in who happened to be closer to him and in front of us. All of a sudden, though, I see the homeless guy run and quite literally rush the pedestrian in front of us, like ran up and then stopped about a half foot from this poor dude's face. Since the guy had his headphones in, he probably just wanted to mind his own business and walk home quietly. He was clearly taken by surprise and stopped and took one of his earbuds out to see what this crazy dude wanted. Me, while I am a bit of a risk taker, I still don't like putting myself in the wrong place when I don't need to be. And this freaked me out, and I didn't want the guy to notice us and come at us next. So I stepped left off the sidewalk and into the street. Now, there was a pretty big lane for a street parking, and it was lined with parked cars, so I conveniently hid myself from view behind a car as I continued walking. I then heard this guy start yelling obscenities at this poor pedestrian. Things like, "I'm going to run you over with my car, I'm going to find you." Like I said, we were not 100 feet from the entrance to my boyfriend's apartment at this point, and after witnessing that, I just wanted to be inside. My boyfriend, he had continued walking on the sidewalk, and in an instant I had come back into view, and we turned right towards the apartment at this point. Now, the apartment did have a main entrance from the street side on the sidewalk, but my boyfriend had just moved in and didn't have the code for the front door yet. All he had was his fob to the parking garage that led to the stairwell up into the place. We were using that at the time to get in. We walked up to the parking garage door, clicked the button so that we would start rolling up. I hadn't looked behind me at that point. I knew I probably should have, but a lot of times if you just ignore the crazy person, for lack of better words, they will just in turn not bother you. So I was kind of following that tactic at that moment. The garage door was open and we went inside. My boyfriend clicked the button to close it. We started the short walk to the door to the stairwell. The garage door was nearly closed, and I don't know what prompted me to look back, but for whatever reason I did. And what I saw still gives me chills to this day. It was the homeless guy from the street. He was squeezing under the garage door while he still could. I remember the chill that ran down my spine as I locked eyes with this guy, and I yelled at my boyfriend, "Jack, he's following us." I'm really not sure what I expected my boyfriend to do, but he pushed the door to the stairwell open and started running. This was the oh no moment when I realized that this guy had access inside now, because the door to the stairwell, it didn't require a fob or have a lock. Me, definitely not wanting to be the closest one to this guy, took off running after my boyfriend. As I pushed the door open and got inside the stairwell, I could hear the guy behind me doing the same thing as it was swinging back closed. I looked back and locked eyes with this crazy guy once again, and just about wet myself as I realized that my only option was to keep running and try to get inside of our apartment and close the door before he got there. Yes, this guy was smaller, but what really freaked me out is, since he had a backpack, I had no idea if he had a knife or a gun in there or what. I mean, why else would you chase two people and outnumber yourself like that, right? My boyfriend lived on the 3rd floor, of course, so we proceeded to sprint up 3 flights of stairs. I could hear this guy's pounding footsteps behind me. At last, we got to our level and opened to the door to the hallways, and sprinted to his unit, and without looking back, unlocked that door as fast as we could. It still felt incredibly slow though, and slammed the door shut right behind us. I remember taking a breath and looking through the peephole, and expecting to see this guy standing there ready to yell at us, but nothing. My heart at this point was absolutely pounding, and I mean, what the heck just happened, right? We called the cops and told them what happened to us. I'll admit that they probably did all they could, but it didn't feel like enough in the end. I mean, I was freaked out. This dude now had access to and was inside the building with access to all the apartments and residents. I just imagined him hiding in the stairwell for the next poor soul. And well, the cops came, drove around the perimeter of the complex for a few minutes. They weren't able to search inside the building because apparently they didn't have access in, and we weren't allowed to let them in for whatever reason. And they left after not finding anyone. It took me forever to get the urge to finally leave that apartment to go run our Sunday errands, but eventually we did. Now, I'm sure the guy was just high on drugs and he just decided to be crazy that morning and bother some unlucky people. He probably left after he realized that he was screwed if people found him there, and somebody else would call the cops. But still, being chased up those stairs by an absolute maniac, that one I would not recommend to anyone else. Throughout my life, I believe that I've come into contact with 3 different types of paranormal spirits that have affected me in one way or another in very different types of situations. The first situation, it occurred when I was 6. My family moved into a new town in a very old house. The house that we moved into had a bit of a history we learned about later. Apparently, an adolescent who lived in the house tried to end their own life at least 3 times, twice in the house and once in a big cedar tree out front. We didn't find out about that until we'd already been living in the house over a year, and really there was nothing that we could do about it anyway. We didn't have the means to move, and it wasn't like it really should affect us in any way. But for the first few months though, living in the house, I would often wake and find pieces to a small china tea set on my headboard. I recall one in particular very vividly. It was heart-shaped, gold-trimmed, a saucer with a lady in a yellow dress waltzing with some dude. In total, I got about 8 pieces. My sister got about 5. My mum and dad had no clue where they were coming from, and we didn't own them, that's for sure. We also had a very protective St. Bernard in the house, so no one ever really came in. While my sister and I were getting presents, my mum woke up one night hearing our St. Bernard growling in my brother's room. When she went in there to check, a sharp shard of glass was laying on his pillow next to his head. Our St. Bernard would always sleep in my brother's room after that too, which was really odd. The second entity that I've come into contact with, we'll fast forward about maybe 1.5 years. Now, my mum is friends with this lady called Mrs. Bradstream. My older brother is in class with one of Mrs. Bradstream's kids. It's summertime, they're moving away, so my mum offers to help them with a garage sale. There are like 8 kids total, ages from 15 down to like 4. At one point, the 15-year-old asks me if I want to go inside. It was hot out, so I did. I was 7 at this point. Somehow we ended up sitting in his closet. I don't know how, but he asked me if I wanted to, do it with him. I knew what that was at that moment, and it was only for Mummy and Daddy's, so I just left his room. As I got downstairs, they had blankets over the windows to keep heat out, and it was in the living room when I saw it. There was a tall figure leaning on the back of the sofa. Its face was sort of burnt umber in color, and very long and angular, dark, sunken, recessed eyes. It held out a hand towards me, but upon seeing it, I took off running outside and would not leave my mum's side after that. Fast forward again, I'm 19 at university in Alaska. A bit of backstory here, as I think it's pretty relevant. My friend and I were in the same course and coming home late at night, probably around 10 p.m. At the school, you would walk 1.5 miles on the path in the woods to get from campus to housing, with a highway halfway through it. It was very snowy that evening. I was wearing boots, so I was clearing a path through the snow that had been falling. As we got up to the intersection, there was another student who was standing up there, wearing boat shoes and jeans, so I told him to just follow us, and I was nice and polite, told him that I would break a path for him. But then he started sort of stalking me. I won't include the details of the stalking, as it's a bit of a long story, but he ended up getting kicked out of school, but right before he got kicked out of school is when the event happened. Now, I was walking back from campus by myself in the middle of the day. I was on the path and at the top of a hill when all of a sudden, standing in the woods in front of me was this tall figure. Whatever it was wearing dark clothing, and it was that figure with the burnt umber face again. It held its hand out to me again, and I remember just feeling a horrible tug from inside myself pulling me towards it. I just stood there staring at it, and it almost felt like it was pulling me towards it, like tugging me. And eventually I'm just like, no way, and I turned and found the strength to run away. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that if I had let that thing pull me into the woods, that my stalker probably would have killed me. I'm sure that being was showing up at times in my life where I've had to make a decision to either go this way or that way sort of thing, either death or assault or get away myself, and so far I've gotten away. It terrifies me just thinking about it, knowing that 100% positive it was the same figure that I had seen when I was 7 and when I was 19. Now, the next incident I came across is back in my hometown. But before I can really tell this incident too, I do feel it's pretty imperative to tell a little bit of background about my hometown. My hometown is in central Minnesota, and it's one of the sites of the uprising where homesteaders were violently killed. There's actually a memorial on the outside of town about the White family massacre, telling about the uprising and how the White family was slaughtered in their home. So, there's a very violent history around this area. Back in 2013, I was moved in with my uncle. He had been diagnosed with cancer and he had lived alone, so I moved in to help him out. My uncle and I got along really well. I loved him dearly, in fact. Then he passed away in the house. And well, it was about 3 or 4 days after he passed in the house that I started noticing things were off. There was a pillow that had been in my room on the top of my shelf that was suddenly in the living room. I moved the pillow from the living room. I put it in the cupboard behind a cabinet, like a big heavy wooden bookshelf cabinet that would have weighed at least 50 to 75 pounds, so it wasn't easy to move by any means. But the next day, that same pillow was in the kitchen. I put the pillow in the garage at that point, but it was back in the house. The next day I put the pillow in the shed, and it was back in the house again. I don't know what was going on with that pillow, but it wanted to be in the house for whatever reason. I ended up pulling the stuffing out of the pillow. I burnt the pillowcase, and I used the stuffing and made one little stuffed animal that I still have. It sits on my bookshelf, and it's been there ever since about 8 years now. The other ones I made with other pillows, and I gave them away, and nobody had any issues. Now recently, a neighbor of mine passed away in their house, and his nephew was living in the house with him when everything happened. The nephew stopped me outside and asked me if I knew of any paranormal things that have happened around this area. I was like, yeah, and I told him that I had had that experience with the pillow. He told me that the day after his uncle had passed, when he took a shower, he saw a small, childlike figure walk past the shower. Apparently nobody was in the house, but this figure walked by and just left finger marks across the steam on the shower wall. I was outside a couple of days after he told me about that, and I saw a light go on inside the neighbor's house. I checked the vehicles outside, and nobody was home. The lights were on, and about 3 minutes, then the lights went out, and they did this for about an hour, flashing on and off every 3 minutes. So I asked my neighbor if he had any smart lights or anything that would go on and off, and kind of a flicker when they don't have a good connection or whatever. But he said no, they never got any of those. So I mentioned the light going on and off, and he confirmed that no one was home that day. I guess after that happened as well, he was too afraid to do anything about it, so eventually he just left the house and went out and slept in the fish house. Now, this may seem a little bit far-fetched, but this is just my conclusion. I'm pretty sure that this town is actually haunted by the spirits of the warriors and victims from the area who were a part of the massacre some time ago, and when death occurs or something bad, they seem to come around and try to make us uncomfortable for whatever reason. Obviously, that's just a guess, but it's the best theory that I can come up with so far. So, if you have any thoughts, then I'm certainly all ears. So, there's been 2 happenings in the past week or 2. The first time I went outside to call our cat in, and then 2 of my brothers locked the door as a joke, so I started pretending to be our cat, meowing and scratching at the door. We were all laughing. I could hear them laughing through the door as well. But then I heard a meow. We had let the cat in. She ran in when my brothers closed the door. It was from the edge of the darkness, and I knew that it wasn't my cat. It was someone or something mimicking a meow. 3 of our neighbors moved out recently, so 3 houses were empty and have been for months, and our other neighbors were out or either asleep and no one was walking past. Eventually I went inside and I just sort of forgot about it. The second time though, my mum had gone out, so we were watching the house at this point. I was playing games with my brother and I heard a knock at the door, so I yelled to my younger siblings to open the door and let Mum in. The kids wouldn't respond, so I went to do it, and the wooden door was open, and the screen door was closed but unlocked. Now, none of the kids had seen Mum at the door. It happened about 5 minutes later, except there's a voice that said yoo-hoo at me at the same time, through the window, so I check it. I was already next to it. But the weirdest thing is that nobody was there. And I mean, I heard it clear as day, and there was really nowhere to hide. I was looking through the window in less than a second as well. Plus, my mum actually came home 5 or 10 minutes later as well. I have no idea what that was or how it happened, but something makes me think that it was related to the meowing I heard the other night. Also, just the other day, I heard something tapping on my window. I heard it like a slow tap to get my attention, or like someone gently throwing a small rock at your window to get you to look out. I refused to look out, not even a chance I was going to. But I have to admit that this whole thing is starting to scare me, and that's why I'm here. What should I do about this? I've always been around paranormal stuff. It used to happen to my mum all the time before I was born, apparently. I've heard all the stories, so it was somewhat familiar. The first time something ever happened, and I haven't been able to explain it, was when I was about 11. I had woken up early-ish in the morning, and I heard this bang on my closet door. It wasn't like a normal bang, too. It sounded like someone had hit my door with an open hand from the inside. I swear that I could feel the outline or sensation of that hand, too. My first initial thought was that someone was hiding in there, so I went to open it, and nothing was there. Safe to say, I was petrified at that point. The day went on, and I sort of forgot about it, until the same thing happened the next morning at around about the same time. I jumped that time, and I went and had a look again, but there was nothing there. This happened consistently every morning for a while too, and it just became normal to me, but then I told my mum. She tried debunking it, but none of it made any sense. She told me, though, that if it is something paranormal, I apparently needed to stand my ground and say that I don't like what it's doing and this is my house. So I heard the bang and said what my mum told me to say. I can say that it didn't like that a second after that too, because it hit my closet door way harder, followed by this massive scrape like sharp nails going down all the way down the door sound. But after that, it stopped happening so often, and then suddenly it just stopped. I talked to my mum, telling her that it stopped, and then she said while I was away that she apparently cleansed my closet. Several years later, I'm still in the same room, and I haven't heard it since. There's been other experiences, but not the same way that this one made me feel, and it was something about the aggression of the hitting that has always just sat with me. I was alone in a part of the schoolyard during the morning break. In the country I lived back in then, it was common for schools to have 2 breaks, a 30 to 45 minute break in the morning and an hour-long one at lunchtime. Now, there was a really tall tree, and I was sitting on one of the large roots that stuck out of the ground when I heard someone approaching. I turned to see who it was, and I saw that it was one of my friends. She said, "I bet you can't catch me." I told her that I could do it, and we started running around the tree while I tried to catch her and reach out for her. We were both laughing, and she was right. She was way too fast for me to reach her. Then one of my classmates called my name. I stopped running and turned around, and the boy who called my name asked, "What are you doing running around the tree by yourself like that?" I was about to tell him that I wasn't alone when I suddenly saw that my friend, who I thought was there with me just a few seconds ago, wasn't there anymore. It was really strange for me. So in the end, I just told the boy that it wasn't important, and I just felt like doing it. Later that day, I saw my friend, and she came and said, "How have you been?" And it was like she hadn't seen me that day. I didn't say anything about it or about what had happened earlier, but while we were talking, she mentioned that she had spent the break in her classroom talking with some of her friends, and it was true because I asked one of the friends later. This made me think that I was crazy or something, as it was impossible that she could be in 2 places at the same time like that. Several years have passed since that day, and I really still cannot find an explanation for what actually happened, and I've really never told anyone about it too. I don't know if it was something supernatural, a glitch in the Matrix, or if I just imagined it, but what I do know is that I saw her. Also, I would appreciate if anyone could help me understand what this was and what actually happened, because it has had me perplexed for many, many years. So my encounter happened in February of 2007. I used to work third shift at a paper stock factory warehouse. The main day shift supervisor was on vacation, so our boss on night shift decided that she wanted to leave early. She let us sneak off about 2 hours earlier than our normal shift end time, so this would have been between 4:30 and 5 a.m. Now, I was following a co-worker down this county road, as the warehouse was on the outskirts of my small rural town. I noticed that he had hit his brakes and proceeded to swerve off the road. I'm not far behind him, and I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is this dude doing? And that was when I saw it. There was a tall, dark shape strolling down the middle of the road, in a sort of hunched over and swaying side to side sort of manner. I have likened it to how one of those tall windblower figures that you see swaying at a car dealership or something like that moved. Very unnatural movements. It's hard to do it justice by describing it, as it would only really make sense if someone saw it themselves, I feel like. It looked like a tall person wrapped in a large, dark blanket or cloak or something. I had to hit the brakes and swerve too, but I came to a full stop. Whatever it was, I couldn't make out any features or characteristics. I saw a large torso with 2 legs. The upper half was sort of hunched forward as if it was leaning like an older person would with a walker. At that time, I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer, and I've looked up the height of the vehicle. It lists at around 6'7", but whatever walked past my driver's window was a good foot or more higher than that, also leaning forward. So I believe that whatever it was at least 7 feet tall minimum. Again though, I really couldn't see any head, any arms, just a figure with legs walking. My taillights illuminated it though as I started to drive past it. I couldn't make out any definite details for the body. I didn't see fur, skin, or anything like clothing. It was solid too, not like a translucent type of thing. It was just large, thick and black, or at the very least dark grey in colour. My coworker had pulled over into a parking lot a little ways down the road. I followed him in, and you could tell that he was scared. He was saying something along the lines of, what was that? It didn't have a head, among a lot of other things most panic people say. We decided to drive back down and try to see if it was still there and what it actually was. I drove in front and he was following behind. We came up to the general area and I noticed that there's a large black animal lying in the middle of the road. It appeared to be a big black dog. Part of me knew that this wasn't large enough to be what was walking in the road, but we had to stop because it was directly in the middle of the roadway. I decided to get out and walk up to it. All the while, my coworker is yelling at me to get back in my vehicle. As I approach whatever is laying on the road, though, it brings its head up and looks back at me. Its eyes are glowing yellow, which I write off as eye shine from the headlights, but it also growls at me. So I stop dead in my tracks and just watch it. This thing then stands up on its back legs like a person, but falls back down. It sits back up and sort of hobbles off to the side of the road, like a wounded animal that wasn't able to use its front legs. It looked like your typical German shepherd or wolf type face, but its fur was puffy like a chow dog's. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but still nowhere as tall as whatever was walking down the road earlier. I didn't see any blood or wounds, so I can't say if it was actually hurt or not. My coworker got out of the car at this point after it had disappeared into the wood line. We discussed what the heck just happened, but while we were talking, I noticed next to our feet was a mouse. It was just standing there with us, but it was cleaning itself. I nudged it with my shoe and it just kept cleaning its face as if it wasn't afraid of us. The mouse was sitting in an upright position, as in it was on its hind legs, and using its front paws to wipe itself. I never really considered it until recently that all three of these bizarre happenings were all on two legs. In any case, we got back into the vehicles and drove off, and then the next time at work I had mentioned what happened and our co-workers sort of laughed at us, so the other guy who saw it told me that if I don't stop talking about it, he's just going to deny it and best just forget about it. So for essentially 15 years, I've never told anyone up until recently. I have tried to rationalize it into something that makes sense, but even then it just doesn't completely add up. I've tried to explain it away as it was just a large dog that must have gotten hit by another vehicle before my coworker and I got there. Maybe it was messing around with the mouse and it got hit, which broke its front legs, so that's why it was trying to use its back legs like that. The mouse was traumatized from the dog trying to mess with it, so it was just standing there cleaning the dog slobber off of itself. That sounds at least plausible, until the original thing that we saw walking without a head comes up again. The dog was nowhere as tall as that thing was, so even with the dog standing upright, it was close to maybe 6 foot roughly, but whatever was walking had to have been well over 7 feet tall, as it was so much taller than my Explorer, even with it hunched forward like that. So I can explain away the dog and the mouse, but I cannot just explain what that was. So I always come back to square one, trying to understand what it could have possibly been. As someone who's always been very skeptical, it becomes very hard to accept the unacceptable. I've always been interested in weird creatures and such, but I never truly believed that they existed. I still struggle to believe that all these crazy stories could be true, and yet, who am I to say that they're not? Especially with the weird stuff that my former coworker and I went through that night. All I know is what I saw, but whatever I saw is something that I don't know, and probably never will. It sounds crazy, I know, and I personally would be hesitant to believe it if somebody else told me this happened to them as well. All I can say is that is what happened. I've been staying with my fiancée pretty regularly in the last few years. Now I'm staying in this house pretty much full time. There's always been something in this house, a presence. I think it used to live in the hallway, but has since also moved to the living room. We even used to joke about it, called it by a name, which I'm not going to use here because I feel like I've sort of tempted fate enough already at this point. Now, you could already almost always feel this being and saw it lurking at the end of the hallway once or twice. But since I moved in, things have begun to really ramp up. It started with whistling at like 5 in the morning. I heard it, my girl heard it, the dog even heard it. Since then, though, this thing has repeatedly knocked on the door while I'm home alone. It has growled at me twice from the dark living room in the middle of the night, and now I've woken up with scratches on my leg too. Also, to add, whatever it is, it knows my name. Not only did it just call my name and bang on the closed door of the bedroom, it also called me by my dead name. The first name that I used when I came out, one that I haven't used in years. Then it called me by my middle name. I'm honestly scared, and other than burning this place to the ground, what can I do? My name is Luke. I'm from the UK and I work as a district nurse. This is a nurse who visits patients in their own homes, care homes, etc., just not in a hospital setting. I've done my time in the hospitals, I guess you could say, but no more, thank you. I've wanted to tell this for a little while now. It's short, but also I knew that I wanted to describe it properly and clear in detail. So I've been waiting for some spare time to sit down and get this out. A little bit about me before I begin. I've been a nurse for almost 20 years now. I've seen and dealt with most things that you can think of. I've always had an interest in the mysterious side of life, I guess you could say. However, It wasn't until nursing that I started to believe in ghosts. Now I question what ghosts even are. I consume paranormal podcasts, allegedly true stories, and true crime, and as I'm sure that you hear all the time, this is a true story. I'm sharing this to create a discussion, to reinforce that professional people can experience paranormal situations, and to get it recorded before some parts are lost to time from my aging brain. I would like to hear feedback, your thoughts about what my student and I saw. So, about 2 years ago on a cloudy British July day, I was mentoring a third-year nursing student. The nursing student was close to qualifying and was what we call a mature student. They have kids and have gone back to university later on in life. I'll call her M. M was naturally good with people. She was honest and caring. Myself and her went to see a patient, we'll call her P, who had complex needs. She needed observation, vitals checking, bloods taking, and wounds redressing. She lived in an old semi-detached house on the outskirts of a small town, and due to the complexity of the visit, I needed to collect items from my car boot. I advised M to go in and introduce herself and start her assessment on P. We give third-year students more autonomy. Once I had collected all the items such as a BP monitor, HR, SpO2 monitor, blood bottles, etc., I locked my car, entered the small front garden, then knocked on the white UPVC front door and walked in. The layout of the house when walking in through the front door is like this. Directly in front was a thin hallway leading to an interior door. To the left were stairs leading to the first floor, second if you're American. To the right was an open door which led into the living room where the bay window was at, the front of the property. I walked in saying hello. My eyes naturally went to the open living room where I saw an old lady. I'll describe her later. I heard my student call me from behind the door at the end of the hallway. I walked down the hallway and I opened the door where I saw M speaking to P in her kitchen area. Without concern, we carried out the care for P, M doing most of the work with little input. The whole visit probably took maybe 30 minutes, and as things were wrapping up, I asked P who the lady was in her room. She said something along the lines of, "Lady? What lady? The TV's on." I said, "No, the lady in your room." P said again, "I'm the only one in my house." I looked at M, I guess trying to think. However, as I did, I noticed that she had gone white and her eyes were wide. She looked scared. I advised them to both hold on for 2 minutes. I'm now thinking that a confused lady had entered the patient's house or something. However, getting to the living room, nobody was there and no TV was on. Besides, it was a tiny 20-inch thing anyway. I checked upstairs, but nothing. As stated in the layout, the front door is opposite to where I was along the hall, so I would have seen or heard someone leave. I said to P that no one's there. I must need a break or something. P laughed and said her thank yous to M and myself. But before I get to what M and I discussed, here's what I saw. I saw an old lady, maybe about 5'3", short, white permed hair. She was wearing a brownish pleated skirt, small flat dark shoes and a light blouse, I think white. She had her back to me and was walking away. She was only about 4 feet away from me. She was solid as if someone was looking at M or anyone else that I interact with. I saw no part of her face, and in some ways, I guess I'm glad for that. In any case, when Em and I got outside the property, for my own mind and to ensure that I didn't pass any bias, I asked Em to describe exactly what she saw. She described the lady's looks perfectly, the same as I saw. The only difference was that she said that she was nearing a chair and was moving in a manner to which she was about to sit down. However, she didn't see her face like I did. This obviously really creeped me out. I mean, I think I had just seen a ghost with a witness. Did I see a ghost? Did I witness a time slip, or Was it a conscious spirit inhabiting a house that she may have lived in at one point? I do also have to say that even though she dressed in old lady's clothes, they didn't look out of date, if that makes sense. What I mean is that I see other old ladies wearing similar clothes to her. I don't know. The whole thing really has struck a chord with me though, and that's why I'm here. So, what are your thoughts? Myself, a 21-year-old female, and my partner, 20 and male, were at our friend's new place last night for a few hours, helping them settle in. They're both around our age as well, 19 and 18. One of our friends is known for being very spiritually gifted and connected. She's seen spirits ever since she was able to walk and talk, apparently. I'm very spiritually connected myself, but not in the sense where spirits show themselves to me or anything. Anyways, we're all hanging out in the living room, just chatting and watching Golden Girls when our friend freezes and immediately started crying. We all comforted her and asked what was wrong. I immediately knew by the look on her face that she looked down her hallway and that she had seen something. We all had a weird feeling too, which was odd. It was an eerily quiet moment. She said that she saw so clearly a tall, buff male figure in a long white gown walking across her hallway towards the staircase that leads to the front entrance. This was then followed by many footsteps being heard since they moved in on Saturday. I asked her if it felt negative or anything, and she said that she didn't think so, but it definitely frightened her a lot. She said that she felt her face go pale and she felt a weight on her chest. We sprung into action, seeing how shaken up they both were after they realized how uncomfortable they now were to be in their new home overnight. So we grabbed some incense, salt, and some selenite from my apartment, and I cleansed every corner of the house with the intention that whatever or whoever was chilling in the apartment would move on. But I guess I'm just curious to see what others think of this experience, and I'd like to know if it could mean anything spiritually. I know that things like this can be typical of major life events such as moving to a new place, but I am looking forward to hearing from anyone who may resonate with this and have anything to add to it. There is a little hot springs nestled near the peak of the Mimicry Pass in central Idaho. Though it is hidden in plain sight, sitting quite literally on the shoulder of the road, it's not a well-known attraction outside of the valley. But the local ranchers are quite familiar with Barney Hot Springs. It's not unusual to drive by on the weekends and see several families enjoying the water. Barney Hot Springs, or simply Barney's, is incredibly remote, even for Idaho standards. It's at least an hour of driving over ruddy dirt roads to the small town of Salmon in the north. If you need a hospital, it's over 2 hours to the regional hospital in Idaho Falls to the south. To say that you're in the middle of nowhere at Barney's is an understatement. But the seclusion is one of Barney's major drawing points, that and the odd abundance of tropical fish swimming in the year-round warm waters. You can sit back, relax, and take in the surrounding views of the mighty Rocky Mountains with little in the way of distractions. But Barney's isn't all that it seems to be on the surface. You see, an event 40 years ago turned this little hot spring from a local retreat to a local nightmare. On the afternoon of October 27th, 2 truckers stopped for fuel at my parents' gas station and cafe in Howe, Idaho. They were hauling a load of hay or something over the Mimicry Pass, headed for a delivery point somewhere in Utah. As the truck fueled, the 2 men settled down at the cafe counter and ordered some coffees. Sipping his coffee, the old trucker struck up a conversation with my mother and the regulars in the cafe. He seemed a bit on edge, but was normal in comparison to his younger partner. That young man was clearly shaken and didn't say more than a quiet yes ma'am or no ma'am to my mum. He kept his attention on the cup of coffee he cradled in his shaking hands. As the older trucker and the others conversed, he brought up a peculiar event that had happened to them that afternoon. So they had crested the Persimmon Pass and were coming down into the Little Lost Valley. As they approached Barney Hot Springs, standing in the middle of the road was what looked to be a child. Bringing the truck to a stop, they soon realized in horror and fascination what was before them. It wasn't a child, but an odd, humanoid-looking creature. Its body was slim with long, slender limbs and a squat little torso. The head and the eyes were large and amphibian-like. It was not standing any taller than a preschooler. They could see its green skin shimmer in the brilliant midday sun. Dripping with water, it was clutching a large bundle of what could only be described as hundreds of eggs. The creature watched the truck come to a stop, then awkwardly walked over the rest of the road and down an embankment. It was obvious from the trail of water that it left behind that it had just come from Barney Hot Springs. On the other side of the road was a small stream, hidden in dense willow bushes. No sooner had the creature disappeared, the two truckers were driving away as fast as their engine would take them. My mum and a few regulars at the cafe took in the man's story with silent, somber expressions and comforting head nods. This wasn't the first time strange things had happened and been witnessed in this little lost valley. Of course, a frogman carrying his brood certainly was the most unique story that they had heard in a long time. The regulars told the trucker not to get too worked up over the incident, as it could have been the autumn sun playing tricks on their eyes. The reassurance seemed to calm the men. They finished their coffees in a few quick gulps and headed out the door. My mother and the regulars had a good chuckle over the man's story and went on with their day. The following morning, on October 28th, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in Idaho struck the area. The Bora Peak earthquake was a magnitude 7.5 and could be felt hundreds of miles away. It destroyed farm infrastructure, roads, and bridges. It even killed 2 children on their way to school when a brick building in Chalice, Idaho, collapsed on top of them. It was a horrific and frightening day for everyone in Idaho. Barney Hot Springs was not far from the quake's epicenter and did not escape its wrath. A couple passing visitors near the springs that morning watched in amazement as the water drained into the earth, leaving behind a stinky, mucky hole. Minutes later, to their further astonishment, the water came splashing back into the depression, but was now boiling hot. It was a truly bizarre geological event to see. The boiling stopped immediately after the earthquake ceased, and the water at Barney's quickly cooled. It's now more of a warm springs, having permanently lost about 15 degrees of temperature after the earthquake. The frogman has been seen a handful of times since that initial sighting, always near Barney's and almost always standing in the road. I personally like to think that the frogman was just a doting parent getting their babies out of harm's way before the earthquake struck and annihilated everything in the hot springs. Barney Hot Springs is still a widely popular spot for the locals. No one seems to be too bothered by the idea of sharing the water with a little odd amphibian man and his family. Someone even reintroduced the tropical fish after the boiling incident killed all of them. It remains just one of the many weird stories to come out of the Lost Rivers area of Idaho where I grew up. I would describe myself as an open-minded skeptic. At least, that's what I would have said, until maybe about 2 months ago when I had an experience that forever changed me. Now, I really don't know what to call myself. This happened in early July. I was on a trip with my wife and mother-in-law through the United Kingdom, and we had a few days in Edinburgh to take in the sights. Now, I knew that my family was originally from Scotland, but I wasn't sure where. Edinburgh seemed a pretty safe bet though, since that's where J.K. Rowling is from, and my last name, while rather uncommon, is incredibly similar to a minor character in the Harry Potter books. We had heard that she took inspiration for a number of characters' names from headstones that she found in local kirkyards, cemeteries, so we decided to take a look for ourselves to see if we could find anything. Long story short, we did. Early one evening, we visited St. Cuthbert's kirkyard near Edinburgh Castle. By random chance, we arrived just as the paranormal bus tour was leaving. The tour group were all lined up by the bus, but the tour guide was walking alone through the kirkyard to meet them. Clearly not one to miss the opportunity to spook some out-of-towners as we crossed paths, he told us to be on the lookout for the ghost of a little 6-year-old. He said that she likes to tug on people's jackets, which we took as an opportunity to make a few predictable jokes to scare each other once we were on our own. So we walked around the graveyard for a bit, talking about the various names that we saw, and I made a point to mention that if we did see any of my ancestors, the spelling might be a little bit different. After some time, I felt a small hand hold mine. My wife has pretty small hands, but she was standing on the other side of me, and this also felt smaller, childlike. There was no chill in the air, no eerie feeling that I was being watched, just a small child's hand reaching out and holding onto mine. I didn't say anything out loud because my mother-in-law is very religious, and I'm already on thin ice with her over some of my political stances, so it just seemed best to keep my mouth shut about an ongoing paranormal encounter. So there I was, walking through a graveyard with my wife on my left, my mother-in-law behind me, and an invisible child holding my hand as we looked at the tombstones. I was completely silent the whole time. I wasn't afraid, but this ghost seemed friendly almost, and people say that I have kid magic, so I figured, hey, this kid probably just wanted to hold my hand and take a stroll. It wouldn't be so out of ordinary had the child in question been somebody that I knew, and, well, alive of course, but I digress. I slowed my pace to make it easy for the kid to keep up. I have long legs and people say that I walk fast, which caused me to fall behind a little as my wife went on ahead. My mother-in-law was reading the headstones carefully, causing her to fall even further behind, and I realized that I didn't want to split up our group, so I looked ahead and called out to my wife. I was going to walk over to her, but the hand suddenly pulled back on me. I kept my eyes on my wife and told her to wait up for us, and the hand started tugging towards the right side of the path, slightly behind me. It wasn't violent. It felt more like a kid trying to get me to look at something. I was still facing forward when I heard my mother-in-law's voice from behind me on the right side of the path. "Is this what you were looking for?" I turned around, and sure enough, she was standing in front of a large headstone engraved with my family name. About a dozen of my ancestors were directly beneath us in the end, and a ghostly child's hand seemed to be trying to show me that they were there. I paused and took in the experience. It was incredible, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude, I guess. After spending some time there, the grip of my hand loosened slightly, but it didn't let go. We continued on our journey, and I found myself swinging my right arm involuntarily to a slightly different rhythm than my own stride. If you've ever held hands with a small child while they're skipping rather than walking, you know what this feels like. After a short walk, though, the swinging stopped, and suddenly I felt my hand released. There was a slight brushing feeling as this spectral hand took leave of my own, and when I looked in the direction that might lead, I saw that I was standing in front of the grave with a girl's name. Apparently, she died at 6 years old in the early 19th century. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of that headstone, but if I saw it, I would know it right away. And if I ever return to Edinburgh, I'll make sure to bring her flowers to thank her for showing me around. Now, I'm no stranger to odd noise and stuff that I could maybe debunk, Or at least stuff that I could convince myself wasn't real. Like feeling that I'm being watched, the intense kind of feeling where the hair stands on the back of your neck and you start to slightly panic. Or our Alexa suddenly being on volume 10, it's usually on something really low like 2 or 3, and then shouting that it doesn't understand what we're saying when we haven't said anything. Or the fact that at 2 a.m. someone knocked on my bedroom door very loudly when both my parents were asleep in the bedroom on the other side of the house, only for me to open my bedroom door and no one be there, even after inspection. Thinking about it now, there would be absolutely no way for either of my parents to sneak out of bed, come to my room and knock on my door, and then make it back into bed in time for me to have come and open the door. I also hear every noise in the house. I know when they open their door, and I know when they're using the bathroom. I can hear everything, and I didn't really hear anything that night. Still, I pushed it to the back of my mind and told myself that it had to have been one of them, even after telling them about it and them swearing that it wasn't them. But then, about 2 months ago, I was sat downstairs with my mum watching TV. She paused it so that she could go to the bathroom, so I went to go and make us a cup of tea. She got upstairs, and then, maybe about a minute later, as clear as day, I hear her shout my name, so I walk towards the stairs, and she's coming down at the same time. But before I say anything, she asks me if I shouted for her. I told her that no, I didn't, and that I thought that she shouted for me. We both thought that it was creepy, but laughed it off, until my mum came into my room tonight and said that my dad, who's extremely skeptical, said that last night after my mum had went to bed, he stayed downstairs to watch a movie, and he had heard what he thought was my mum whisper or shout his name, and that he's absolutely sure that it came from the kitchen. He said that it couldn't have come from anywhere else because the stairs were on the other side of the house. He went into the kitchen and nothing was there apart from an open cupboard. He went upstairs to make sure that my mum was in bed, and she was. The door was closed and she was fast asleep. I think it's becoming obvious that there is something with us and it's starting to bother me. I don't think it's a ghost or a spirit. I really don't know what it is. But when I read up about mimics, I was wondering if there's a possibility that this could be one of them. We've lived in this house for 15 years and nothing like this has ever happened, not apart from small stuff that I mentioned earlier. So I really could use some advice, guys. Was this a ghost or a spirit, or was it a mimic, or is it the same thing? Should I be cautious? Thanks for listening, and I would honestly appreciate anything that you might have to say. My friend was born in France, and her dad's side of the family is something like 17th in line for the throne or something. Basically, her dad's side of the family has historically been very high-class French people, and they have a lot of haunted stuff from pre-20th century France. One of these things is a dresser with a mirror. The family legend goes that in the 1800s, a girl died sitting at the dresser in front of that mirror. Fast forward to 2023, that dresser and mirror is in my friend's apartment. One night we had a party, and after everyone left at around 2 a.m, she fell asleep on her bed and I tried to fall asleep on her couch. It was not quite pitch black yet. I felt safe, but for some reason I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it and just go to sleep. I closed my eyes and started to get tired. After a few moments of attempting to drift off to sleep, I suddenly got a terrible feeling in my gut that something was very wrong. I felt a presence standing next to the couch too. I really don't know how to describe this feeling too. I just knew that there was something there. I shut my eyes tighter, hoping maybe I was just being paranoid. And then something touched my foot. Something literally touched my foot. I felt pressure on the couch right next to my foot, and the blanket brushed against my foot in a way that could only suggest that something had hit or poked the blanket right next to it. It almost felt like someone was about to grab my feet, but got scared and chickened out at the last second. This wasn't some weird thing with the air conditioning or anything too. This felt very human and very solid. My eyes snapped open and I suddenly woke up. For a split second, I could still feel the pressure around my foot, so I know that it was a real sensation that I was feeling and not just some weird dream thing where you think something is happening in a dream, but when you wake up and don't feel it anymore, it's obvious. Plus, I didn't even fall asleep in the first place. I was just laying there with my eyes closed. At first, I honestly thought that maybe my friend had managed to get out of bed and walk past me so quietly that I didn't notice, but accidentally brushed up against my foot or something. But then I turned my head to where my feet were and I saw a humanoid shadow standing there, just right there, looming over me, clear as day too. Like I said, it wasn't quite pitch black in the room, but this thing, whatever it was absolutely null of any sort of light. When I saw it, my blood instantly ran cold, and I got that gut feeling that says, get out quickly. I blinked, looked away, but when I looked back, it was gone. I quickly turned around to check if my friend was out of bed, but she wasn't. In fact, she seemed to be fast asleep. I turned on my phone and used the light from the screen to investigate a little bit, but nothing. There was nothing lying on the couch around my foot. There was nothing around the room. So, what could I have possibly felt? I mean, there wasn't anything in that room that looked even vaguely like a human silhouette. So, what was that shadow and where did it come from? My instincts were screaming at me to leave, so I grabbed my bag, slipped on my shoes, and I just left. Somehow I felt safer walking around New York at 2:30 in the morning than I did inside of my friend's apartment. So, what do you guys think about any of this? I feel like it must be connected to the dresser and the mirror in some way, right? But the entity had such a dark energy. It didn't feel like it could have been the ghost that's supposedly attached to the dresser. If anyone has any idea about what I should do about all of this, then I would love to hear it. Should I talk to my friend? Should we do something about this? Please, do let me know. I'm currently dog-sitting for my grandparents, who live in a very rural part of upstate New York. They've got 3 Dobermans who I love very much, and I pretty regularly stay over to help with the dogs when my grandparents are out, just so that they don't have to be kennelled and all that. My grandpa, he used to be a volunteer fireman, and he always had a police scanner turned on at all hours so that he could be ready if something happened. He hasn't helped with the fire brigade in years, but the scanner is still on in their house. I've gotten very used to the staticky noises that it makes, and tend to tune them out. Until last night. You see, I was standing in the kitchen next to the scanner while I was making dinner, and I suddenly became aware of the whispering coming from the scanner. I've been listening to this thing jabber for 21 years now, and I've never heard a whisper like this. But that's not really the part that freaks me out the most. My grandparents moved from an old farmhouse a couple of years ago. The farm was built about 200 years ago, and it was absolutely haunted. There was this one distinct sound that always happened when I was home alone in that house, and it was the sound of a couple arguing. When they moved into this new house, I never heard a thing. No footsteps, you arguing, no doors opening, nothing. Until last night when the whispering started, and I started hearing the arguing, just like the old house. It sounded like it was coming from outside in the driveway. There's a window above the sink in the kitchen that you can see the whole driveway from, and when I looked, there was nothing. Just some birds sitting under the feeder my grandparents have set out there. But then, The arguing seemed to escalate into screaming, and suddenly all the birds took off. I stepped out onto the back porch to let the dogs back inside and just stood there to see if I could hear the arguing from the front. It seemed to come out of the woods in front of me, so in the end I just went back inside and I locked the door. I really didn't know what to do, so I shut all of the curtains in the house and slept as far away from the driveway as possible with the dogs. Now, I tend not to get freaked out about bumps around the house, but being in a haunted house alone in the middle of a town is much different than out in the woods. I know the consequences of getting too comfortable out here, and it had me worried. I'm not really sure if this will have any kind of explanation. I guess I just wanted to share it here because it's just so strange, right? If you've listened this long, then thanks for hearing me out, and here's hoping that we don't have a repeat of that old haunted farmhouse. This happened a couple of years ago now. I, a 26-year-old female, was walking my dog Indy in my local field. It was dark, but it wasn't late. It was winter time in the UK, so maybe 6 p.m. The field is mainly used for rugby or football, but is completely free to walk through whenever. It's also surrounded by houses and streetlights on the roads, but the field itself is dark, so I had brought a torch with me, mainly so that I didn't tread into some dog poo. I've come in one entrance of the field, and I'm following a path that leads to another exit or entrance. I use the field to make a loop back around to the road and back to my house, giving my dog some off-lead time whilst in the field. Anyway, as I'm walking up the field, I notice a figure walk in the exit or entrance that I was going to use to leave. I keep my eye on this figure as they have very dark clothing on and their hood up. I'm shining my torch as I'm walking, so I know the person knows that I'm there as it's very obvious. And at first I wasn't really nervous, more so just being vigilant, I guess. Indy is a wonderful German Shepherd, so as you can imagine, I feel pretty safe with her anyway. It wasn't until I saw the person duck down behind a bush or a tree — there's lots of new trees and bushes planted sporadically up the part of the field that isn't used for sports — that I absolutely froze. I was about 200 feet from the exit, but would have to walk past that bush, the one that they hid behind, to get to it. I call Indy over and get her on the lead so that she's close. By this point, she is also hyper alert due to the person ducking behind the bush. She obviously noticed too. But with that, I hear a weird, sort of high-pitched voice that sounded like they were saying my dog's name. I assume they heard me call her. They said it maybe 3 or 4 times in this sort of longed-out, high-pitched voice. It clearly was coming from the person hiding. Luckily, Indy wasn't reacting to it, as it probably barely sounded like her name to her. It was then that I had a moment of shall I fight or flight. Either I, 1, run past the bush and try for the exit, 2, turn around and run back into the dark field and make for the other exit, a lot further away though, or 3, confront this guy. Indy at this point is hackles up, ears up and very alert in front of me, all whilst still maintaining a wonderful sense of calm. In the end, I went with number 3. I decided to confront this dude. I mustered up every bit of courage and confidence that I had, and shouted at the top of my lungs, "What are you doing?" The hooded man came out from the bush very quickly without saying anything, and I said the same thing again. "What are you doing? Trying to scare a young woman?" I'm so glad that my voice didn't shake or break when I said it, as I really was terrified at this point. He started to stutter and said, I thought that you were someone that I knew." I answered back and said, "Who hides from someone that they think that they know in a dark field?" After that, he apologized a couple of times and continued to skulk down the rest of the field, and I made for a swift exit with Indy. Who knows what his intentions actually were? I mean, maybe he thought that I had a smaller dog and was going to try to attack me. Maybe he saw Indy and realized no chance. Or maybe he really did think that I was someone that he knew. Whatever the case was, it was weird and really, really scary. I'm a woman in my 30s who lives alone in a small house at the head of a quiet cul-de-sac in the UK. The street is a maze of roads away from the main road, which means that other than delivery guys and the occasional salesperson, you very rarely see anyone that you don't recognize. I don't exactly know all of my neighbors, but I do know what they look like, and I know where they live. I can recognize their cars, etc. Now, this weirdness happened over the space of a few months several years back. I work from home, so I'm usually in, and sometimes I don't have a lot to do. The first day was one of those lazy days. It was about 4 p.m. and I'm sitting on the sofa watching some daft stuff about alien cover-ups or whatever. Someone knocked on the door. I have a surveillance camera hidden in the wooden canopy above the front door, so I checked to see who it was because I wasn't expecting any deliveries and I couldn't be bothered to deal with a salesperson. It was a woman who looked late 40s to early 50s, very smartly dressed, like really expensive clothes and even jewelry. Stuff I could never afford, in fact. Most people around here generally couldn't afford it either. We're not an affluent area by any means, and this lady stuck out like a sore thumb. She looked flustered and agitated, glancing towards the back garden before trying to look through the tiny frosted glass window on the front door. I noticed that she was carrying a dog's lead, but I didn't see a dog. As it happens, at the far side of my back garden there are 2 hedges. There's the hedge that I own within my property boundaries, and there's a second hedge outside my boundary that's council-owned, along a sort of small grassland where people walk dogs. I know for a fact that there is a hole in the council-owned hedge, which I've reported it to council at least a dozen times over the past decade, and they've done the square root of sod all about it. Because of my hedge, though, I cannot reach it to do anything about it myself. Consequently, when I saw the dog's lead, I thought, oh no, I bet her dog has gone through that hole. If it's a big dog, it's not getting into my garden, but if it's a small dog, it might be able to work its way through, and I've always got some cooked meat, so I figured that I might be able to lure it out. I'm a dog lover at heart, so of course I want to help this woman if I can. When I was a kid, my dog went missing for a few weeks too, and I thought that I was never going to get him back. I was heartbroken for those weeks, but fortunately we did get him back, and ever since I've been extremely sensitive to pets in need. Anyway, I open the door and this woman gives me the weirdest look, like she was expecting someone completely different to answer the door and that I shouldn't be there. To be fair to her, my mum used to live here too, so I didn't think much of that weird look to begin with. Maybe she was expecting her. In any case, I say hello, and she sort of just stares at me for the longest 30 seconds before she tries to look past me and asks to see Margaret. I don't know what it is about other people's mistakes, but whenever someone has the wrong number, I always end up apologizing as if it's my fault. So that's what I did. I apologized and told her that there was no Margaret at this address. Again, she gives me that look, only this time there's anger behind it. Yes, there is, she insists. It occurs to me at this point that I have a relative called Margaret, but she lives about 60 miles away and I haven't seen her in years. Nevertheless, just in case she's got her addresses muddled, I ask, "Are you looking for Margaret?" and gave the surname. But she just hisses at me, "You know exactly who I'm looking for. What have you done with her?" I am absolutely lost at this point. I've lived here 20 years and I know the name of the previous owner, so I know that she's not asking for them. I also know the names of the neighbors and the names of the people who have lived on the street in the time that I've been here and since moved. And none of them are called Margaret. So all I can do is tell her that she's got the wrong address. "No, this is," and her name, and her address, "you're lying." That was a tad alarming. I mean, she's definitely at the right address. She's not knocked on the wrong door. However, she clearly thinks that I've done something to somebody who, to the best of my knowledge, has never lived here. I don't know how long the previous owner had this house, but we must be talking about at least 30 years since anyone called Margaret might have actually lived here. It's at this point that I notice that she subtly wrapped that dog lead around her now clenched fist, like she's planning to use it as a weapon. In my youth, I did plenty of self-defense training, so I'm not exactly scared of her as such, but I'm obviously getting a bit concerned about the situation that's brewing. I don't particularly wish to get involved in a brawl on my doorstep with a complete stranger after all. I'm torn between shutting the door in her face or trying to de-escalate the situation. In the end, I close the door a little so she's got less to aim at and tell her, "Look, I don't know who you're looking for, but if you think something's happened to your friend, then maybe just call the police and let them sort it out." Sure enough, the woman slams her fist with the lead wrapped around it into my door. I later discovered, too, that she'd struck the door hard enough to crack the frosted glass window in the middle of it. She's bleeding from doing it. It must have hurt, but she doesn't flinch or show any sign of pain. What the heck, right? Any confidence that I had in my self-defense classes started to waver here a bit because I'm not used to people who don't feel pain. All I can think now is that she's on something and having a really bad trip. So at this point, I put on my scariest voice and tell her to get back. I let her know that I'm calling the police, and if she's still here and they get here, she can deal with them because I'm not dealing with her anymore. She then tries to stop me from closing the door, but I shove her back and manage to get it closed and locked. I make a point to stand next to the door while I'm calling 999 so she can hear me. While I'm waiting for the police to turn up, I watch her on surveillance feed. She moves out of shot multiple times, presumably to check the back of the house, and I hear her calling out for Margaret. A few minutes before the police finally turn up, I see her kick my wheelie bins in a rage, but then the most chilling thing happens. She walks back to the front door and literally stares directly into my camera. Now, that camera is pretty well hidden. I'm not saying that nobody could spot it, but most people would only know it was there if they'd been looking for it. Most people aren't looking for cameras, right? But she knew that it was there. She must have eyeballed it previously. When, I don't know. But I later reviewed all the footage I had from that day, and she never made eye contact with it once. She never even looked in that direction. I only had about a week's worth of footage before it. The oldest footage is overwritten, and I checked everything that I had, and she was only on the camera that day. All I can think is that maybe she had been here more than a week prior or something. While she's staring right into it, though, she flips me the finger and then makes a throat-cutting gesture before turning and walking off. I head to the window to watch her leave, and she's walking like she doesn't have a care in the world. She doesn't look back and just wanders away. Police finally show up. Good job I wasn't being murdered. Take a statement. I give them a copy of the surveillance footage, and that's that. I called a couple of times to follow up, but nothing. Nobody ever called me about it, too. I won't lie, too. This had me up for a few weeks. I moved the knife block closer to the door as well, though out of sight of any of the windows. I started staying up really late and not getting much sleep, which really didn't help. On some nights I was so tired that I started experiencing auditory hallucinations. I'd hear people who weren't there talking, and because this woman was the curse of all of my stress, I heard her voice and the name Margaret most of all. Every time I heard the gate open, it always put me on edge. I'd review the surveillance footage every day, and eventually, as the weeks passed and I hadn't heard anything else, I started to regain some of my comfort and just put it down to a really weird experience. But it didn't last. About 4, maybe 5 weeks perhaps, after the first encounter, she came back. It was just after midnight. I was in the living room mucking about on my phone with the TV on low volume for some background noise. I heard a car door slam and I peeked out the front window. A dark-coloured car was parked at the end of my driveway. I couldn't see what make or model it was, but it looked like some sort of, I don't know, maybe estate car? I think Americans call them station wagons, right? I didn't see anyone moving about, but a minute or two later, the front gate swung open with its metallic groaning, and there was a knock on the door. Even when I'm not involved in a blood feud over imaginary Margarets, I'm not going to answer the door at that time. I checked the surveillance camera. Its night vision mode is pretty bad, but I am positive it is that woman again. I can even see what I think is a dog lead as well. And of course, she knows I'm watching her because she looks at the camera again. And I tell you, when somebody is already giving you the heebie-jeebies like this, the way night vision makes people's eyes look like soulless black voids doesn't do much to make you feel better. Suddenly she yells out, "Shut that racket off and come out here now." I had the TV on, but as I mentioned, it was on a very low volume, which was so weird because, there's no way that she could have heard it from outside the front door. I couldn't even hear it if I walked into the hallway. I'm convinced at this point that she's mentally unwell, so I call the police again. I want them to stay on the line, but they just tell me that someone will be over soon and to call them back immediately if things escalate. So I'm waiting, watching, and just hoping that she doesn't start trying to smash a window or something. She kicks over my wheelie bins again. I don't know what she's got against them, but whatever. And yells something else out, which I couldn't quite make out, but whatever it was enough for one of the neighbors to come and investigate themselves. I watched the neighbor talking with her for a minute. She's remonstrating about something, wagging her finger towards my front door, but my neighbor is eventually able to get her to leave. He even sticks around for a bit to make sure that she's gone. Sadly, that also means that she's gone before the police turned up again and made me feel like I was a bother to them. Another statement, handing over more security footage, more nothing. I caught up with the neighbor the next day and he apologized because it didn't occur to him to make a note of the registration plate, but he told me that she'd said much the same thing as she said to me previously. She wanted to know where Margaret was and what I'd done with her. I'm grasping for answers at this point. Even if she is mentally unwell, the fact that she's sticking to this Margaret story and has the right address makes me think that there's something more to this than somebody having a breakdown. But then it clicks. Is Margaret her dog? Does she think that I've stolen her dog? Did she have a dog go through the hole in the back? Does she think that I've hurt her dog? Is that what this is all about? It'd be another few weeks before she came back. This time at 3 a.m., I'm awoken by knocking on the door. A few minutes later, I hear tapping on the bedroom window. I know that it's her instantly. I can hear her saying things, but I cannot really make them out because they're too muffled through the windows. It's like she didn't want to get the neighbor out again, so she's trying to keep quiet this time. I jump out of bed and put some clothes on as quickly as I can. I try and follow her as best as I can as she moves around the outside of the house from room to room, knocking, tapping, and muttering. I think that I hear a few coherent words like noise, racket. I'm pretty sure she called me some expletives as well, but maybe I was imagining that. I can't check the surveillance footage this time because she spray painted the lens. Not that it'd matter much this time. She's not lingering by the front door at all. I think about calling the police again, but honestly, it's just proven to be a waste of time so far, and I get the feeling that if I call them out a third time and she's gone, then they're just going to start accusing me of wasting their time, even if I do have the evidence. They've not exactly been that helpful so far, after all. In the end, I wait by the front door and listen to her. Eventually, she knocks again and I call out, "Is Margaret your dog?" Dead silence. Nothing. I can't see anything through the frosted glass because it's too dark. I have no idea where she is, and I don't want to turn the outside lights on. To be honest, I don't even know why I feel this way. She knows that I'm in the house because I've called out to her, but I still don't want to draw any more attention to myself. I end up standing there for who knows how long, at least an hour, probably more because the sun starts coming up. My heart is going a mile a minute, pretty much the whole time. Once it's bright enough, I start checking through the windows to see if I can see her, but no, nothing. I tentatively open the front door and look outside. I still cannot see her. I grab something to arm myself with just in case. I can't remember what it was now, but I check all around my house and the back garden, but she's not there. But as I'm heading back to the front door, I spot the oddest thing. The gate is closed. That gate is physically attached to the side of my house, and when it opens and closes, it makes a fair bit of noise. You'd immediately hear it if someone opened or closed it when you were standing next to the front door, but it's closed. So, what does that mean? Did she jump it somehow? It's possible, I guess, but I certainly wouldn't want to try it. Anyway, I open the gate and head out to the end of the driveway. I look around and there's no sign of anyone. I turn back to the house and I see that she spray-painted liar on the front door of my house and left the dog lead on the floor beneath it. That was, thankfully, the last time that I ever heard from or saw this woman, but I think she still comes by sometimes. Ever since all this happened, I get this really creeped out feeling occasionally at night, and I always check out the window. I don't know whether I'm imagining it or what, but every now and again, I swear that I see a dark-colored estate car out on the street. Not parked at the end of my driveway these days, but I just can't shake the feeling that she's in there, watching my house. Perhaps she was looking for her dog, and she keeps thinking that she'll see me with it at some point. Whatever the case, this whole thing was strange, and it shook me. I'm still living with it, and I just wish that it never happened to begin with. On Friday, I left work at lunchtime to go for an overnight bushwalk to a remote campsite in a national park that is about 60 kilometers from my work in Canberra. I decided not to take a tent as I was planning to sleep in a hut that has a fireplace. It's still winter here. This hut is about 2 kilometers walk from many fire trails and can only be reached by walking along a narrow foot track that climbs up a hill for about 45 minutes. The hut only gets a handful of visitors each year due to how difficult it is to find and reach it. My car was the only one in the car park, and I never passed anyone else on the way. There's only one track in and out of this place too. So when it got dark, I started a fire in the fireplace and had my dinner. I was tired and decided to go to sleep at around 8:30 p.m. as I planned to get up early to walk back to my car early in the morning. But at around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a loud machine, really loud, like being directly under a helicopter or something. When I peered through the hut's window, I could see bright lights flashing around, lighting up the trees, but I couldn't see the source of where the lights was coming from, which made me think that they must be above me. There was no way that I was going outside to investigate, so I just sat on a camp chair, wondering what the heck was outside. After a few minutes, both the sound and the lights stopped suddenly, like they'd never been there. Now, there was nowhere for anything to land nearby as the hut is in a heavily treed area. After a few minutes, I got the courage to go outside with my head torch, and all I could see was that some grass, it had been slightly burned around the hut. Nothing else seems to have been damaged or disturbed, but I stayed up for the remainder of the night and left for my car just before daylight came. There's no way that a vehicle could get to the hut, and I don't think that search and rescue would have a helicopter up at night in such a remote area like that. Plus, there's really no Air Force bases nearby either. The national park doesn't allow hunters, so I really have no idea what it was or what was going on. Also, I don't drink or use any drugs, and I'm not on any medication that could alter my perception. I also don't have any mental health issues or anything. So, do you guys have any idea as to what this could have been? Has anyone else had a similar unexplained encounter like this, particularly around Canberra in Australia? So I was just watching a YouTube video about some scary internet rabbit holes, and the Hatman came up during it. As I was listening, I heard the guy describe it as wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat. And this is the first time that I'd heard about the trench coat, and suddenly a memory hit me very vividly. I'm in my mid-30s, and this memory takes place in one of the first houses that I ever lived in, when I was maybe 5 or 6. So this was decades ago now, but I do remember at the time the memory was vivid for months, but I guess it faded over time. Anyway, the house that I lived in had a big front window which was in the living room, and next to it was the front door. This door was not the main door that we or guests used, as the side door was right off the driveway. So it was very odd when, during the night, maybe 8 PM, sundown and dark, but not late night, I heard a knock at the door, a single knock. I turned and looked out the window and saw what at the time I thought was a dark-winged duck. I know, it's kind of humorous to hear that, but as a kid that's honestly what I thought it was. A big wide-brimmed hat, what looked like a long coat, but all black. There were street lights there, so it wasn't pitch black, but dark-winged duck was just the silhouette. Of course there was no beak or anything, but that was what my mind went to. I was also extremely creeped out at that moment, and for weeks or months following. I asked my parents if they were going to answer the door, and they asked why. They didn't hear the knock apparently. I was afraid to look outside, but I forced myself, and when I did, there was no one there. But this YouTube video reminded me of this, and I had so many chills that it was crazy. I don't know why this mention of a trench coat pinged this for me, but it just hit me. It's kind of cool to think that something beyond the normal happened to me at least once in my life, but still, it definitely sent shivers down my spine. Feel free to discuss or share your own thoughts about this experience. I'd love to hear more directly from people as opposed to compilation videos and the like. If you have any theories as to what this could have been, then be my guest. I'm a woman living alone in my apartment that is located on the ground floor, and so my balcony is very visible for others to see. Like every night, I work at 4 in the morning, so I leave at around 3:40 AM. Unfortunately, in France, they decided to turn off the lights from 10 PM to like 6 AM, I think. But thankfully for me, the landlord where I live turned the lights on just for me from 3 AM to 4 AM. It is very dim, but I'm still thankful for it. Anyway, this Thursday night, I leave like always. I go into my car, locked it, turned on my lights, and something caught my eye, so I looked up and thought that was just a cat jumping from my balcony because they love to come by just looking around and then they leave. But it wasn't a cat. It was a man standing next to my balcony. I think the light surprised him, and I'm looking at him walking away from me on the grass, but he can't leave that way, so I'm staring at him, scared and calmly crying, not knowing what to do for like 10 seconds. But then I can see movement again, and it's him walking towards me, looking at me quickly and then just continuing to walk to the main road like nothing happened. He takes one last look at me in my car before I lose sight of him. Also, he was wearing black sweatpants and a camo jacket, and it's pretty weird. I don't know what he was doing here, if he was sleeping on my plastic sofa on my balcony or I don't know what, but I cannot stop thinking about his face looking at me or what could have happened if it was pitch black outside. I wanted to make a report to the police, but they said that they can't because there's no damage. The lady also told me no, but maybe it wasn't for you, maybe he was looking around for a dwelling or whatever. And I said, at this hour and in this outfit, I don't think so. And then she replied, no, I'm talking like a robbery. And I was like, of course, right? Since then, every night I run like crazy to my car with pepper spray in my hand. Also, I bought surveillance cameras on my balcony just to check before going out at night because now I'm super paranoid and I'm kind of developing OCD and I have to look and check outside before going to sleep too. Anyway, after this, I placed the cameras out there like I said. The position is perfect too and I can move the camera from my phone even if I'm not home. But this is where things are getting even weirder. So the first time that I saw someone was 4th of May at 3:40 a.m. In June, nothing happened, so I thought that maybe it was a one-time thing, like wrong place, wrong time sort of thing. 4th of July, I'm getting ready around 3 a.m., and 20 minutes later I see a notification from my camera on my phone. I didn't get nervous because sometimes my camera just captures bugs or spiders or whatever. But oh boy, my heart skipped a beat when I saw what was on there. I opened the notification and the video started. I saw a man walking straight next to my balcony, and he was also hiding his face. I froze like for 5 minutes and I decided to call the cops because I didn't know if he was still there because the camera didn't send any notifications after that. I noticed that sometimes my camera doesn't capture anything. The cops came and he wasn't there anymore, but I was certainly weirded out by the situation. 23rd of August, third time's a charm, right? I left for work at 3:45 a.m., yes, precisely, and while I was driving, I get a notification at 3:47 a.m., and it is again the same dude from July. He is still hiding his face, but I now recognize his gait. I called the cops right away and we met at my place. I was crying and explained that it wasn't the first time that it had happened, that I didn't feel safe and I couldn't understand why this was happening. The male cops were minimizing the situation and that got me really ticked off because they could see that I was confused and scared, but they kept saying that there was no need to worry. Maybe he's not here for you. I don't care. It's 3 a.m. and it's dark outside and a random dude is close to my place, hiding his face like that. Anyway, they couldn't do anything because there were no damages, but I decided to lay down a handrail just in case, even though I know that they can't do anything. I'm still very nervous every night when I have to go to work. I got my pepper spray with me just in case. Also, I have great neighbors around me that kind of helped me in some ways, but I don't know why he's here and why in the middle of the night like that. No idea. I'm sure that I've forgotten some details, so feel free to ask some questions if you would like to try and help me out, but in any case, thanks for listening. So this was a few years ago, but I thought that I would share it because to this day it's one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Basically, a few years ago, my sister lived in this house share. It was a huge house too, 3 stories with 5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. At the time, my sister was the only one living there, so all the other rooms were vacant. My sister's bedroom was on the ground floor next to the kitchen. And one night, I was staying there with her. She'd gone to bed a couple of hours ago, and I was suffering with insomnia at the time, so I was in the kitchen talking on the phone with a friend. It was about 3 a.m. While I was on the phone, I just got this horrible, overwhelming feeling of being watched. It was like something, not someone, was in the room with me, and whatever it was did not want me there. I tried to ignore it, thinking that I was just being silly, and continued my conversation for a few minutes, but it got to a point where I straight up just did not feel safe in that room anymore. So I told my friend that I was going to bed and I hung up the phone. I went into my sister's room and she'd always told me to lock the door behind me, even when there was nobody else in the house. It was a standard lock that just had to be turned, so I did that and then I grabbed my blanket and I laid on the floor to sleep. I must have only laid there for maybe a minute or two when I heard the sound of the lock clicking and the door creaking open, and suddenly that feeling of dread was back. It took me a minute, but I finally built up the courage to turn around and check the door was wide open. While I was staring at the door, I couldn't see anything, but I could literally feel something there watching me, just as I was frozen. I finally managed to reach my hand out to shake my sister awake, and she had to get up and close and lock the door because I just physically couldn't move out of fear. I had a lot of experiences in that house, but that by far was the scariest to me because, quite honestly, that night, I felt like I was about to die. This happened when I was young, maybe 8 to 10 years old. I remember it perfectly, but have confirmed the details with my mother, and the memory of it sends chills down both of our spines to this day. So, it was broad daylight on a Saturday, and I was in the town centre with my mother. The streets were busy and the people bustled past. We paused at a shop front that sold ornaments, the ugly, old-fashioned kind that old grannies like. We'd often stop to look at them and laugh at how expensive they were, wondering how that place even stayed open. I was a real chatterbox as a kid though, and was talking animatedly to my mother about something or other, facing her as I did so. And like it was yesterday, I remember her smiling face and how it suddenly dropped. Her jaw hung open and her eyes were as big as a dinner plate. She just stared at me silently for a few seconds and then grabbed my arm hard and pulled me away. Her fingers were digging into my arm as she dragged me into the crowd, walking as fast as she could without running. Being that kid, I squealed and loudly kept saying, "What are you doing? Ow, Mum, you're hurting me, that hurts, where are we going?" while trying to stop. She gritted her teeth though and silently dragged me for about 3 streets before stopping somewhere less busy for a second. It was only then too that she let go of my arm, rubbing it and looking extremely upset. Looking me dead in the eye, she explained that as I was talking outside the shop, she had noticed an old man stood behind me. He was dirty and disheveled, like the horror movie stereotype of a creepy old man. I had long pretty hair as a little girl, and people stopped us all the time to remark on it, especially when I wore it loose. And this old man had very gently lifted a handful of my hair in his hand and was smelling it, tickling his nose as he did so. I was clearly so absorbed in telling my story, I hadn't even realized that I was being touched. My mother made eye contact with the man as he opened his eyes while inhaling the smell of my hair. He gave her an absolute nauseating toothy grin, quickly dropping my hair and waving at her, wagging his fingers all cutesy-like. "Whoopsie, you caught me" was the sort of vibe that he gave, clearly knowing exactly what he did. He then disappeared into the throng of the people moving past. My poor mother immediately felt sick and just went into autopilot, dragging me away as fast as she could in the opposite direction. I didn't even know how to react when she told me what happened, except to be horrified and so glad that we had gotten away safely. I still walk past that shop, and the memory of my mother's haunted expression always makes me feel ill when I think about it. So first of all, English is not my first language, so I apologize for any mistakes in advance. But here's the deal. For a long time in my family, we've seen my mum in places where she physically could not be. Like one day, I was with my sister watching TV and my mum was at work. Then the front door opened and my mum appeared, showing only the top half of her body, bending over so that her waist and legs were out. She seemed sort of, distracted, turned her head in all directions and then asked for my other sister. There are 3 of us. We told her that she was in her room. My mum said, "Oh, okay, thanks," and came out. But it was super weird. But then, a few hours later, she got off work, came home, and we asked her about what happened earlier, and she said that she was apparently at work all day. I want to clarify too that my mum is a very serious woman. She doesn't make jokes and she doesn't lie about stuff like this. So that was obviously super creepy. Other days we would hear her calling us, and then when we go to her room or the kitchen we find out that she's not even in the house. But the creepiest thing happened before I was born. My mother was at home at about 9 p.m. watching TV, and her sister was washing dishes in the front of the window. Then my mother heard her sister calling, "Sarah, it's late, come into the house." Then my mum replied that she was already in the house. But her sister didn't hear her. She kept calling my mum because she was apparently watching her through the window playing outside in the garden. Then my mum shouted that she was already in the house. Her sister turned her head towards her, and then she turned her head towards the window, and right in front of the window was a copy of my mother, as a child obviously, only she looked pale and sort of haggard and very thin. My mother and her sister swear that this was real and that the girl even smiled at them from outside the window. They both ran to their room and they stayed there all night, being unable to sleep. Coupled with the events that we ourselves have experienced in my home, I really have nothing left to do but believe her as well. I've even seen my mum at night walk through our rooms and leave without saying anything, and she's not a sleepwalker. As a bonus too, my mother was born in a very small town in Mexico. Apparently there are testimonies of apparitions and supernatural things that are there all day long. And since her childhood, she has always experienced supernatural things that are not at all pleasant. Anyway, I'd love to hear what your opinions are and if there's anything that we can do about this. I rented a house with 3 other roommates. After moving in, everything was fine for a while, until 2 of them went out of town. My one roommate and I were in the basement watching movies and decided to sleep on the couches since it was the first night everyone wasn't in the house. When, from right above us, in the upstairs living room, we heard an incredibly loud dragging sound as if someone dragged our kitchen table across the floor, and so we were convinced that somebody was upstairs. We thought maybe one of our roommates came back or something, so we decided to go up and check it out, but when we did, there was nothing. The doors were locked, nothing had been moved, no roommates anywhere. This continued for the next couple of days too, getting worse and worse and only ever occurring at night. We also heard sounds like someone was running up and down the stairs, which was freaky, let me tell you. One night too, we went and checked out all the rooms just to be sure. After turning off all the lights and closing the doors, we checked underneath to make sure all the lights were off too. We heard the sounds again, and when we went back upstairs, the spare room light was on this time. We tried to tell ourselves that it must just be only the house making noises, but once our roommates got back, it never happened again. But things got worse. One night, I woke up to someone banging on my room door. I open it, and nobody's there. I talked to my roommates the next day, and they were all sleeping apparently. We've all had friends over who have heard the sounds of someone running up and down the stairs too. All my roommates also experienced waking up in the middle of the night sensing something watching them. It was creepy to say the least. But the scariest thing though that I ever experienced was one night when I got up to use the washroom, and when I went to open the door, I had a very intrusive thought that said, "If you open this door, you'll die. Just wait." I don't know why, but I had an overwhelming feeling of dread, and then it passes, like nothing happened, as if whatever this was just gone. I've never had an intrusive thought like that before. The weirdest part though was after most of my roommates moved out and others replaced them, one of them told me they experienced the exact same thing. I never told the new roommates about any details of the strange things that happened there, just that weird things do happen because, I don't know, I didn't want to scare them, but thought that they should know. Sometimes the presence would feel very threatening though, and other times it was really chill. There was a lot more that happened, but I don't want to make this story too long. Oh, and we also got the house checked for carbon monoxide, and it was fine. Anyway, I would love it if anyone has some sort of explanation for all of this, or if they've had similar experiences. Since I moved out, I haven't heard anything strange happen, but have at places that I've lived prior to, so I don't know if it's just me, or maybe it was that house. I want to share something that happened to me when I was really little. Grandma was sick and my parents left me and my sister in our house to go see her. I was 5 years old, a girl, and my sister was 7, I believe. We were told to go to sleep, which we did. When it was already pretty late though, I'm pretty sure way after midnight, I heard meowing outside of our house. I didn't think anything of it, didn't ask my sister, I just went ahead to the front door and opened it. When I did, there were 4 men outside and they looked at me, and I remember to this day one of them had this evil smile. Just by instinct too, I understood that I was in very, very big trouble, and probably within a few seconds, even though it felt like forever, I closed the door and was able to lock it just in time. They went to grab the doorknob but didn't catch it. It just happened so quickly and somehow I fluked it. They started trying to break the door, screaming and cursing, hitting it with feet, shoulders, and who knows what. My sister woke up at this point and we were terrified. She came to me and told me to go under the bed because if they break in, they won't know that we're home and maybe they won't find us. I was too scared to tell her what I did and that they know that I'm here. I remember being under the bed for a very long time and eventually those people must have left. I don't know why and after how long, but we fell asleep and stayed under the bed till the morning time when my parents came back and saw the door all damaged and my sister told them that someone tried to break in. I never did tell anyone what I did that night. I guess I'm just so scared and I panic to this day when I look back at it that I never said anything. I could have been the reason though for my sister and me being killed that night. And I still get completely horrified when I think about that night. This all happened when I was 6 years old and I still remember it so vividly. Just to preface this too, I'm open to the idea of the paranormal, but for the most part, I'm still a bit of a skeptic. I'm one of those I wouldn't be surprised if ghosts really existed, but for now, I don't think that they do sort of people. I believe that there's an explanation for pretty much any paranormal experience that we face, whether it's simple or complicated. So, my parents had immigrated from Vietnam in the 80s and did the whole Ellis Island immigration process. They've lived all over the country, but fast forward to 1993 where they had me in California. In 1999, my family was pretty poor and decided that we wanted to try and get a place with my cousin's family, my dad's brother's family. They went searching for a house in Sacramento, California. They found a place that was oddly cheap. If I can recall correctly too, it was a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house with a gated automatic fence. This was really fancy back then too, and it was a decently sized lot. Now, here are the details that were told to me later in life when I got older and spoke to my parents about the house. There was obviously a catch to the low price point to this house, and the offering price was due to the fact that it was known to be haunted. The real estate agent was very upfront about this too, and mentioned the history of the house. The original owner of this home died in the nursery of the house. The nursery was located underneath the stairs, I think sort of Harry Potter cupboard style, but much bigger and is actually a room. We're unsure of what the owner died from, but my parents didn't think that this was necessary to know or even remember. My dad and his brother were skeptics at the time and were only interested in the price point, really. The real estate agent mentioned that there have been many families that have lived here that experienced paranormal activity and moved out fairly quickly. But this didn't stop them from taking the offer. There were many things that we experienced in this house. Some very typical, such as creaky pipes or wood, extreme sudden cold temps, footsteps, stuff like that. However, I'd like to just share what I deem to be, well, the creepiest moments. Although it was a 5-bedroom house, we had to share rooms due to 2 families living in this house. I shared a room with 2 of my cousins, both around my age, and one of the nights I remembered, this was a couple of weeks living here and we were already experiencing creepy things. I really needed a drink of water. We had a pact that if we ever went somewhere in the middle of the night, we would wake each other up and go together. So I woke up my cousins and told them to come with me to get a drink of water really quick. We had an uncle that stayed with us at that time too. he's that uncle that goes from family to squat for as long as he can, and he still does this to this day. He would stay anywhere he possibly could, pretty much. And well, he didn't mind taking the nursery. Obviously, when we were kids, our parents didn't inform us of any of the paranormal talk that they had. All of our experiences were discovered on our own, pretty much. So, as we walked down the stairs, we could hear our uncle groaning in his sleep, almost as though he was in pain. Well, we sat on the stairs and continued to listen, and we were trying to make out what he was trying to say. We noticed that the name Sam kept coming up, so we got our water and we just went back to sleep. The next day, we brought up what we heard our uncle said to our parents and told them that he kept saying the name Sam. My parents sort of looked at us in terror. Then they tried to play it off and said that it was nothing to be concerned about. And I mean, we were kids, but we definitely knew that they were hiding something from us. But we pretty much just moved on from it. When we were older, though, and talked about this incident, our parents finally told us the truth about that time. My parents told me and my siblings, and I eventually told my cousins, who had already been told by their parents as well. But apparently, Sam is the name of the original owner that passed away in that nursery. They had not at all informed my uncle about the name of the owner. They confronted my uncle, in fact, and he had no idea what they were talking about. This sent chills up my spine, even so many years after the experience. But here is the last experience that was pretty much the okay, we're moving out motive. So, after maybe 4 or 5 months, we had Lunar New Year's party, and typically these drinking parties will go on all night, and it usually ends up into a sort of mellow talk to each other in the living room gathering to the end of night sort of thing. It was probably 1 a.m. at this point, and the people that were left were all in the living room at the base of the stairs. Everyone was pretty much accounted for, but as the night was dying down, everyone was chatting, and suddenly we hear the doors, and maybe the windows too, start to slam shut upstairs one by one. This lasted maybe 10 seconds. It almost didn't sound real because, I don't know, it seemed like there were more doors and windows shutting than we even had. Silence, as we all stopped and stared at the top of the stairs, terrified. My dad and my brother started to walk up the stairs, and some of us crept behind them. They called out to see if anyone was up there, but there was no response. But here's the really scary part. Every single door was open. There wasn't a single door that was actually slammed shut at all. Yet we all heard the doors shut one after the other. I remember so vividly crying my eyes out when my uncle came back and said, "All the doors are open." And after that, we moved out within the week. My parents never shared with me the address of that place. They never wanted me to look it up any further, and I don't blame them, to be honest. However, I'd really be interested in looking up more of the history of the house, I guess. I've tried Googling things such as Sam Sacramento Haunted House, but I've never found anything. I remember what the house looks like, but as extensively as I've tried to search it up, I just can't find it. I'd be interested if anyone is able to find the house that I'm looking for, and I'll give you a bit of a description of the house so that you guys can perhaps help me out. So it was a 2-story white house, very symmetrically boxy, I guess. Big 2-car garage, black gates that surrounded the house that opened up by sliding gates that led to the driveway in the garage, grass lawn with a decent-sized tree. The backyard was pretty much cement and dead grass. It was located in the middle of the suburban street, i.e. not a corner house, not in a circle or court, just a regular drive street address between 2 other houses. And that's pretty much it. If you know of this place, or if you could find it, then I sure would be thankful and would love to hear from you. So I've had a few unsettling experiences in the woods, but this is unquestionably the strangest one. I've been mulling it over for years, and I still can't come up with a rational explanation. A few details have changed to protect my identity, but the story is 100% true. I can assure you of that. So, in 2018, my partner and I drove up to a national forest in Oregon for a day hike in early summer. The area was somewhat remote, but nothing too isolated. Hiking is huge in the Pacific Northwest, so there are plenty of other people on these trails at any given time, especially during peak season. Because of this, we chose a less popular trail in the hopes of getting some alone time. It was approximately a 6-mile out and back moderate difficult hike with a waterfall at the end. It followed a river and didn't intersect with any other trails. Simple enough, right? We were both experienced hikers in pretty good physical condition, so we had no reason to think that we needed anything but day packs with a couple of liters of water and some sandwiches. Getting back before dark should have been a piece of cake, so we set out sometime afternoon. At first, we took it slow and meandered around the riverbank for a few minutes. I found a cool animal bone and we mused over what it might be. It was clearly a verbatim from a large mammal, so we guessed it was probably a deer bone. Because I'm a little morbid and I like collecting things of that nature, I put it in my pack. That might not have anything to do with what happened next, but I feel like I should mention it since it was out of the ordinary. So, the hike to the waterfall was beautiful. We passed a few other people on their way back to the trailhead, but for the most part, we had the place to ourselves. We stopped a few times to look at wildlife or take photos of the flowers. I was tracking our progress on my Fitbit, so I always knew how many miles we traveled and how much time we had before sunset. We reached the waterfall at about 3.2 miles, which matched what the map had said. I paused my watch and we settled on a large boulder to rest and eat our lunch. Another young couple was there with their dog, and we said hello and then minded our own business. But here was where everything went wrong. As we packed up our stuff and we prepared to leave, my partner Michael slipped off the boulder and twisted his ankle badly. The other couple heard his surprised scream as he splashed into the water, so they rushed over to help. The three of us hauled him back to dry land and assessed the injury. None of us were doctors, but we thought that it was a sprain. The swelling had already begun, and Michael said the pain was pretty serious. He could barely stand. Upon realizing this, the male half of the couple started backing away and seemed anxious to leave, I guess. I asked him if he could go get help, but he didn't respond. Neither did his wife. They both just turned around and started booking it up the trail with the dog trotting behind them. I called out to them in frustration, but they didn't look back. Needless to say, we didn't really have any cell service that deep in the woods, so we couldn't contact anyone else, which meant that we had to hike back. "It'll be okay," I said to Michael. "It's only 3 miles, and you can do this." We shifted the water bottles and our modest amount of gear into my pack so we wouldn't have to carry anything and made decent progress. I was still tracking the hike on my Fitbit, and after about 2 miles, Michael ran out of steam and we rested again. I told him to lean on me to take the weight off of his injured ankle. Even though I'm a head shorter than him, it seemed to help, I guess, but we're almost there, I said. Just 1 more mile. Despite the setback, we were in pretty high spirits, though. The sun was still up and the woods were still beautiful. We made light of our predicament. Michael joked that he can't do anything without getting hurt or breaking something, and I comforted him. We both thought the ordeal was nearly over, and eventually I realized that we'd been walking longer than expected. I assumed that it only felt that way because we were moving at a slower pace, but when I checked my watch and saw that we'd gone farther than a mile, I started to worry a bit. We were at 6.6 miles total. That meant that the walk back to the trailhead was longer than the walk to the waterfall. That couldn't be right. But I figured that I must have made a mistake at some point. Maybe I hadn't started the tracker until we already traveled a ways at the beginning or something. Regardless, the parking lot had to be around the next curve in the trail. But when we got there, it wasn't. We went another half mile or so before stopping to assess the situation. Over 7 total miles, and we still weren't back. But what the heck? I checked the map of our hike on the Fitbit app and saw that there weren't any gaps. It was a straight line from beginning to end, with the line doubled back on itself, indicating that we were on the same route. But where was the trailhead? We talked it over and concluded that it had to be a glitch. Michael was adamant that we hadn't passed the trailhead yet, and we couldn't have taken a wrong turn because well, there were no other trails. Plus, the scenery was all familiar. We saw things that we remembered passing on our way to the waterfall. It was definitely the same trail and well maintained too. A big, wide dirt track that followed the river and didn't veer off into the undergrowth. Losing the trail was just impossible. At that point, we started to feel a bit demoralized, but what could we do except keep going? Our phones still didn't have service either. Michael was in a lot of pain and struggled to put weight onto his sprained ankle. It was twice the size of his other ankle now, and he was sweating. I was sweating. The whole thing started to feel like a nightmare. When we went another mile and still didn't reach the trailhead, that was when we began to panic. Night falls quickly in the forest, and we had little daylight left. We were almost out of water too, had no rain gear or other food, and the only flashlights were the ones on our phones. Of course, we cursed ourselves for not bringing more supplies, but we were only supposed to be out there for a few hours. It was just short of a day hike, and we had no idea how it could have gone so wrong like this. Out of desperation, I yelled for help. We'd seen no people since that strange couple had abandoned us near the waterfall, but I was sure that we had to be close to the parking lot. That didn't mean that there was anyone there, but we were both so freaked out I was willing to make a fool of myself if it meant rescue. To our dismay, nobody answered though. We were completely alone, which was really strange. In an attempt to get a grip, I guess you could say, we reasoned that maybe we really had passed the trailhead that we started at. Maybe we were so focused on keeping Michael off his bad foot that we'd simply missed it and were hiking toward the next trailhead. We were pretty sure that that wasn't the case, but it was the only explanation that made sense. We were definitely still on the same trail, and thought that we couldn't be certain, but it seemed like the landscape had changed. We no longer recognized any of the landmarks, except the river, and that seemed to support our theory that we'd gone too far. We knew that we weren't walking in circles, because that wasn't possible. But should we turn back? We mulled that over for a few minutes. If we were wrong, backtracking would guarantee spending a night in the woods. Michael couldn't deal with that angle forever, so we decided to just press onward. I'm not crazy, right? I asked. That initial hike was only 3 miles. We went 3 miles to the waterfall. Yes, Michael agreed. The entire hike was supposed to be a little over 6 miles out and back. We've walked a lot farther than that now. We should have gotten back a long time ago. I don't understand what's happening. When night fell, we picked up the pace. Michael stopped leaning on me and limped down the trail as fast as he could. He later said that adrenaline dulled the pain of his injury and gave him the motivation to continue. Because that part of Oregon is mountain lion country, and I just read about a lion attack a few weeks prior to our hike. Being caught out there in this dark was the absolute last thing that we wanted, but there was nothing that we could do about it. We were scared. Michael shone his phone light on the path ahead to make sure we didn't lose our footing, and I shone mine at the trees, scanning for cat eyes. I was crying. Fitbit said that we'd hiked 9 total miles at this point. And after 9.5 miles, we finally saw the sign for the trailhead and scrambled toward it. Relief didn't completely wash over me though, because I expected that we'd have to either hitchhike back to where we started or trudge along the side of the road for a few miles more. There was simply no way that this could be the trailhead. It was 3 miles past where it should have been. As we climbed the short set of steps up to the parking lot, sweaty, thirsty, exhausted, and completely unnerved, I hoped to see my car, and my prayers were answered. But it was my car. We were at the same trailhead. For a moment, Michael and I just stared at each other in shock. Our fear and misery were replaced by just sheer confusion, and we just stood there. Then a twig snapped somewhere in the woods behind us and broke the spell. We hurried across the parking lot towards the car, and in those few seconds I felt something that I'd never felt before. Just an intense feeling of dread. The best way that I can describe it is the feeling you get in a nightmare when something is pursuing you and you're trying to run away but moving in slow motion. Like your legs just won't cooperate and you know the thing is chasing you is going to catch up. This is the only time in my life that I've ever felt that way outside of a dream. But we did manage to pile into the vehicle and we peeled out of there. I was shaking, Michael was rambling about time distortion and dehydration and how we must have lost our bearings somehow. We got out of the national forest and onto the highway, and it was a while before we encountered any other cars. I didn't fully relax too until we made it back to civilization, and neither of us can figure out exactly what we experienced that day. Michael was on crutches for months following that incident, and his ankle has just never been the same since then. I still have the bone that I found too, but I keep it in a box because it gives me, bad vibes, I guess. When we go hiking these days, we stick to the crowded trails, because whatever happened that day, we do not ever want it to happen again. This is a first-hand account involving some strange phenomena that I have yet to be able to explain. I'm not from the area in which the strange things occurred, and I am curious to see if anyone else has had similar experiences or knows anything notable about the area. So, this starts on a Sunday in August 2013, after me and my pregnant wife had been to church that morning in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, when we decided to take a spontaneous road trip. We drove until we ended up in Paducah. Being impulsive, we decided against our initial range and hopped over to Illinois to explore the Shawnee National Forest. We had been driving for about 30 minutes through thick woods when the tree line broke and we came across a little standalone general store attached to a non-operational lodge. My wife and I, of course, had to stop. It was charming and old, and though it didn't occur to us until later, something was a little off. In the back of the store area, there was a separate unlit room for very old-looking things. There were odds and ends you'd expect to see in a 19th century manor, as well as some very old white dresses for little girls, along with very old black and white photos of the little girls the dresses belonged to. I didn't touch anything, and the only thing my wife touched was something resembling a hand mirror, only in place of reflective glass was what looked to be a blackboard. We had a laugh at the strangeness of it, and we moved on. Now, there was a wooden cutout with a cartoon pig painted on it, and as pigs were my wife's favorite animal, she wanted me to take a picture. I took out my iPhone camera, and as soon as I moved the camera into position, the entire screen turned purple, and the screen split horizontally for about half a second. I had never seen that happen. I tried to get the camera to recreate the glitch, which it did, but only pointing at the pig. I tried to capture a screenshot, but no luck. I couldn't get it to trigger again. I joked, "Ha, it's a ghost," and we kept moving on with our day. But no sooner had we pulled away in the car when she brought to my attention a faint scratch on her leg. I examined it closely, and I assured her that surely she had brushed up against something by the river earlier. As we moved through the forest, which was uncannily dark for midday, she told me that she had another scratch near the first one, which definitely had not been there a few minutes prior. She was freaked out by this, and while I was still dismissive, I was starting to become unsettled. This happened again as well. We crossed the ferry back to Kentucky in a bit of a panic at this point. I pulled over and stared at her leg and watched until 3 adamantly sloppy X's had faded into existence from nothing onto her leg. Now, we had just seen The Conjuring in theaters a few weeks prior and remembered hearing that demons use 3s as a mocking of the Holy Trinity. While it was just some faint, oddly formed scratches, we were pretty scared by them, I must admit. But the weirdest thing is that I can attest that these things came from nothing, with seemingly no cause. In fact, I watched them form on her leg, when there was really no explanation for it. The last of which was a right angle, totally unnatural looking as well. This occurred in Pope County, Illinois, and the store in question is the Bay City General Store. I'm not sure if it's related to these phenomena, but that was really the only place that we gotten out of the car after there, and our stop there immediately preceded the start of the strangeness. And while I'm not a believer in the paranormal, nor am I a denier, but I know that what we saw and experienced that day was 100% real and, honestly, without reasonable explanation. If anyone has been through anything similar or knows of anything unnatural that's happened in this area, then please do let me know, because this one has me stumped.